If you're just getting started with Excel, or maybe you've been using it a little bit, you probably have asked yourself, what is Excel all about? What is it used for? One way of looking at Excel is that it's just a giant grid of columns and rows, but you're more likely to hear Excel described as a spreadsheet package, and that it is, but it's that and a lot more as well, as we'll see in some upcoming examples. At the bottom of the screen are different tabs here. These are called Worksheets. The current one's empty. I'm going to click on the one called Profits. A lot of people would call this a spreadsheet. That's a term widely used, although in Excel we don't use it formally and officially. We've got some budget numbers here. You can see what's happening based on the headings over in column A. Here's a bigger budget. It's a prediction for the following year. All kinds of formulas in here that we're not seeing right now, but lots of information. And I've seen bigger ones than this too, and you probably will too eventually. Other people use Excel for keeping lists. Next sheet over shows customers. This might be hundreds, even thousands of rows. You might be tracking your inventory, or you might be tracking sales or transactions. There are all kinds of reasons for maintaining lists. And Excel provides lots of great data management tools for handling them. The next list over is a list of your employees. It's got a table feature applied that makes it easier to work with. The next sheet over, called Chart, reminds us that in Excel we can take some numbers, which for some of us sometimes are a bit boring, we can turn them into a chart. And that happens very quickly too. There are all kinds of variations on how you can create charts and quick ways to get there too. There's a great analytical tool called a pivot table. You might have heard of that. Got a giant list over here. And we're trying to make some sense out of it. Within a few seconds, you can create a list like what we're seeing on the right that analyzes the data by region, the products, and so on, the customers. You look at those various column headings over on the left, and you can see how we could quickly come up with these. And you don't even have to write any formulas. And if that were not enough, there's some smart art features, like this organization chart on the right. There are about 200 variations, not only on the organization chart, but things like Venn diagrams and production charts, that sort of thing. Got a specialized title over here in the list. So there are lots of different applications for Excel. It's used throughout the world for a variety of different purposes. It's probably the most widely used software package in the world. It's a great tool, and in this course you'll be learning more and more about how you can use Excel in so many different ways. Excel's menu system at the top of the screen consists of a series of tabs, home, insert, page layout, etc. And below that, a bunch of icons, and sometimes we call these commands too. The entire menu system is referred to as the ribbon, and actually a part of it, although sometimes we think of it as being somewhat isolated, above this is something called the quick access toolbar. At the moment it's quite small. We'll talk about that in a bit. As you work with Excel, you need these buttons often. Now, you certainly don't need every one of them. Some of these you will never use. The Home tab is likely to be present on your screen much of the time. As we work with data, there's bold, italic, lots of buttons here. As I click Insert, we'll see a whole new series of buttons. And in some of these, you can just see by the names what they involve. Pivot tables, a bunch of chart icons here, something called spark lines, filters. Lots of choices there too. Page layout, as the name suggests printing perhaps, getting ready for printing. Formulas has, of course, a lot to do with formulas and how we use them and track down by way of auditing. Built-in functions, there are over 450 of them in Excel, are referred to on these various buttons here. And many of you will be using these a lot. The Data tab has a lot to do with data management tools, foremost of which is sorting. A lot of people will be doing filtering as well. And some other tools over here, like an exciting feature called Flash Fill, and another one for getting rid of duplicates, that sort of thing, adding subtotals. The Review tab, as the name suggests, spelling check, for example. We can protect worksheets out here, workbooks if we wish. There's a View tab for changing the way that we see the data. Add-ins you might or might not use, ignore that one for the moment. And an expanded help system with lots of opportunities here for tracking down information on something you need to know. The one tab here that's quite a bit different from the others is the File tab. This takes us into what Microsoft calls the backstage view. It has more to do with the externals, how we open and close and save files. You'll also notice that print is in here as well too. And as you make choices here, of course, the screen will change. If you want to go back into the standard display of Excel, we either press Escape or that leftward arrow at the top of the screen. The Quick Access toolbar up here is designed for you to modify it if you wish. It's got 3 buttons in it initially, a save, an undo, and a redo. But the idea is for certain buttons that you might use often, so that you don't have to go to a particular tab to find them, you can also make a copy of them and put them on the Quick Access toolbar. So an example, I'm going to click Insert here. Suppose I work with pivot tables a lot. I want that button on the screen here all the time. I don't want to have to go to the Insert tab necessarily to get it. I'll simply right-click a pivot table, and you can do this with any button here. Right-click, add it to the Quick Access toolbar. So the next time I'm working with my data, I might be on the Home tab, doing some formatting there. I might be on the Data tab doing some sorting, but if I want to get to pivot table, it's right there. It's always going to be there. And you'll find that you'll want to place certain other buttons up there as well, too. If at a later time you say, I don't use that very much, you can certainly right-click it and remove it. That's going to be very handy as you work with Excel. So, once again, without getting intimidated, recognize this is a powerful set of features here. We refer to this as the ribbon, tabs on top of icons, and you'll be using many, many of these, particularly on the Home tab. Because Excel has so many command buttons in the ribbon menu system, at times you can't find the command. You're not sure which tab to click, and then where's that button that I need here? What's really helpful is what we call the shortcut menu. Anytime in Excel, when you use the right mouse button, you get a pop-up menu, and sometimes you will also get what's called a mini toolbar. Now, I might want a new row between rows 6 and 7 here, and I'm not sure where to find this. I think they use the term insert. Imagine that little scenario. So I'm going to go to the Insert tab up in the ribbon. I'm going to look around here, and I will not find what I want because it's not there. How am I supposed to know that? So what I'm going to do, and here too, maybe it's guesswork, but I'm going to right-click on row 7. This is the actual row number here. I'm going to right-click. And what pops up here is an abbreviated list of commands taken from the main menus. They're not necessarily all from the Home tab. Here's some different choices here. Microsoft has programmed this feature to bring up only the commands that most users are likely to need at this point. And right above it is what we call the mini toolbar. Now, I don't need to do any formatting right now, but if I wanted to make all those cells bold, I can do it right here. I don't have to go up to the top menu anywhere. So I just did that. I'll right-click again on row 7, and I think it is Insert, and this will push all the data down. I want to insert a new row, and that happens. Now, the right mouse button is context sensitive. If I highlight some cells like this and right-click, we're going to see the mini toolbar there, and certainly some of these commands we saw before are there, but there's some others as well too. So it's a slightly different list of commands there, so it is context sensitive. And although maybe it's premature for some of you, you haven't worked with Excel just yet, if I go to one of the sheet tabs at the bottom and right-click one of them, that's a completely different set of features related to worksheets within an Excel workbook where we can add new ones. And you can see some of the terms and probably guess what a lot of them mean. So that right mouse button is really handy, not only for the commands that it offers you, but when it comes time to formatting, that mini toolbar puts those buttons close to where the action is, you might say. If I right-click a column at the top of the screen, I'm right-clicking column D. We would expect to see Insert here, just as we did on a row, and we see some similar commands like we saw before, but this time Insert would mean insert a new column. I don't want to do that here, but if I did, that's where I would go. Many commands in Excel are like this in that you don't really have to go into the menu system. You can use the right mouse button. And even if you right-click one of the buttons that we see up on the ribbon, here's one here. If I right-click this, there are some choices. Turns out I don't want to do any of these right now, but once again, that's the same basic idea. Using the right mouse button brings up a shortcut menu. And I think you'll find it absolutely vital as you work with Excel to be using that many, many times. You just can't remember all those commands and where to find them. So it's really invaluable as you work with Excel. The exercise file that we're using for this movie is at the top of the screen, O1 Examples. In Excel, there are certain terms that we must use consistently. This workbook is called O1 Examples. A workbook is a file is a workbook, and nearly always in Excel we can use those two terms interchangeably. Every workbook has at least one worksheet. And if we were to create a new workbook, we'd see one sheet in it. We can add sheets, we can take them out, and at the bottom of the screen here, we can see in this workbook, there is a Sheet 1 tab, but also a tab for profits, and you can see the other names, 2019 budget, customers, and so on. And we can add many, many sheets. As you can see, we can have color as well too. So we never want to make those terms be used interchangeably. Every worksheet has exactly the same number of columns, the same number of rows. On my keyboard, I'm pressing the right arrow here. As we see this cell moving across the screen, we see the column letters. These are columns. Columns are vertical, and they're identified by letters. And after we come to the letter Z, you see how the lettering scheme starts all over again with AA, AB, and so on. And to get to the far right, and normally we won't need to do this, I'll hold down the Control key and then press right arrow. Takes us all the way to the end. That's the last column. And if you were to figure that out, it's well over 16,000. How do we get back to the upper left corner? We hold down Control and press the Home key. Moving down on the left-hand side, it'll take us a very long time to get to the bottom because the rows, which are always horizontal and numbered, in here I will hold down Control like I did before, but this time down arrow. How many rows are here? Well over 1 million. Now, you don't have to use them all. In fact, most people don't even come close, and why would you? But it's there anyway, and all worksheets have that attribute. How do we get back home? Upper left corner, Control Home. And that location, by the way, has a name. And every one of these cells, whether you use the arrow keys to get to this cell, that cell, or you slide the mouse around and click with the left mouse button, that's a different cell. Every cell has a column and row location. This cell is in column C, row 4, therefore we call it cell C4. And if there's any doubt, look right above the main body of the worksheet here. This is called the name box. That's cell C4. This is D2, this is F2. And these addresses become very important, particularly as you start to work with formulas. So all these worksheets are the same initially, and as I just click on a different sheet at the bottom, you can see how the column widths have been varied on some of these. I didn't change the row height on any of these, but that can be done too. And you can see certainly different column differences here. So every Excel workbook is a file is a workbook, and a workbook has multiple sheets, and they all have, at least initially, the same layout. Those are features we keep in mind as we work with Excel. Excel's built-in help system is substantial. It's available in a variety of ways. You simply can slide over a button. Here's a button here on the Home tab. What does that do? Fill color the background of cells. And this is true of any button we slide over. If there happens to be a keystroke shortcut, here's one for underline. We'll see it, Control U. And at times, going back to this fill color bucket, I'm interested in this. How about tell me more? And this activates a dialog box on the right side of the screen. Couple bits of information. This might be sufficient. I might type in something different up here or something related to get even more information. Let's say this meets my needs. I'll just close that. So that's certainly one way. And keep in mind, as you slide over some buttons, you get a graphic and sometimes a longer description. There's at least one of these on the Data tab here that's quite long, and this isn't necessarily typical, but certain features here. Here's one about removing duplicates, text to columns. It really gives you some insight into the various buttons. So that's really handy. You can also click on an area above the icons called Tell Me What You Want to Do. Just click in there and type in, for example, Create Chart. As I'm typing this, it even senses I'm ready to do that in this case. Create Chart. Okay, looks good. Great names. There it is right there. Click that, gives you some information on that. And that will vary too, depending on where you are on the worksheet. That's handy. And what do we see here? An actual tab in the ribbon called Help. And this is newly redesigned. There are lots of features here. Clicking Help here activates that dialog box on the right side of the screen. You can also get to here at any time by pressing the Function key F1. Maybe I'm interested in formatting. You could click here. And one of these likely is to meet my needs. I'll click there. If not, it's completely self-explanatory. I think you can quickly get the idea as to how you can get help here. There's an option here for feedback if you wish. You can communicate with Microsoft indicating that you like a certain feature or don't like it, or I have a suggestion. And there's a broad community of users, and you can go to some of the various options here. This might lead you into an external site where you can provide or get more information on some of the features in Excel that you're interested in. And here's one called Show Training. And eventually this would lead you into potentially one of the courses like you're watching right now by way of LinkedIn Learning. And what you'll see out here, for example, if I click Cells, and a short video right here giving us information on this particular feature. So there's no shortage of different ways to get help in command. Remember, you can press the Function key F1 at any time. You can go to the Help tab in the ribbon, clicking some of these buttons. Or you can click in the panel just to the right of Help, tell me what you want to do, and type in the feature that you're interested in. So that's going to be really helpful as you work with Excel. No question about it. Data entry is one of the most basic things we do in Excel, and at times it can be boring, but there are some techniques, some shortcuts, and a feature called autofill that are really going to help. Before we do this in this particular worksheet, it's called data entry. It's an empty sheet. We're in the workbook O2, entering data. In the lower right-hand corner is a slider bar. There's a black rectangle there. If you hold down the left mouse button, you can zoom in or zoom out. We're only going to be using about 7 columns here as we build a small little worksheet here, so that's good enough. I'm going to be putting in some data in cell A2. I can either click on A2 or use the arrow keys to make that cell become the active one. I type sales. Notice it's on the left-hand side of the cell. That's what happens automatically in Excel unless you're typing values. I press enter. I could press tab to move to the right. I can press any of the arrow keys. I'm moving down a column, so I'll press enter. And then type overhead. And enter. And then profits. Enter. A bit later, I decide to change overhead to the word expenses. I'll click there. We don't have to erase it. I'll just type right over it. Now maybe I spell it the British way, the Canadian way. That's okay, but later I decide to change that. We don't have to retype it, although that's relatively short. To edit a cell, you can either click on it and then go into the formula bar, click in the appropriate spot, make some changes, or you can double click near the entry and do the editing right in the cell. I'm going to double click behind the C, double click, backspace, S, and enter. I'm going to be putting in some numbers, and caps lock has just been on maybe. The number I'm going to type is 120, and I happen to press O instead of 0. They're right next to each other on the keyboard. I tab over, 160, typing this one correctly, tab, and you can see the difference. Numerical entries in Excel, when entered, always are right aligned. We learned that way back in the 2nd grade before adding and subtracting and eventually multiplying. Let's just do this all over again. 1, 2, 0. If it's not purely numerical or if it's not a formula, Excel will left align it. Numbers are right aligned. All right, I'm going to be putting in 4 numbers, and as I move to the right here, I'll be pressing tab. So I type the 160, tab, 210, tab, 250, tab, 325, and 440. And after the last entry, I'll press enter. And then 6 more numbers here, starting in cell B3. And then pressing enter after the last one. I'm going to be putting in monthly names across the top, so I'll type January and tab over. Now, a shortcut that you wouldn't know about falls under the heading of autofill. Anytime you have a month spelled out or a 3-letter abbreviation, you can point to the lower right-hand corner of that cell. That's called the fill handle. Notice how the mouse pointer changes its shape, becomes thinner. Holding down the left mouse button, I'm dragging across. Those little pop-ups below suggest what's about to happen. We'll get the other months. We can drag all the way up to December and even beyond. It'll start over again. And we can do this in a variety of different ways. You can start with any month you want, and you can use a 3-letter abbreviation. If I type in JUL and then point to that lower right-hand corner and click and drag, you probably have guessed already what we're about to see here. Same thing happens rightward. If you drag rightward or downward, same thing happens. If you drag upward, I'll drag upward from here. We go backward in time. Same thing happens if we drag leftward. So you quickly get used to that. It also works with days of the week. And also, we can use the letter Q and the number 1 in a variety of combinations. And you can actually use any of the numbers 1 through 4 because Excel only cycles through those numbers as we use that feature. And of course, we mean quarter. And the same thing works with QTR and any combination of 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the word quarter in that same combination of 1, 2, 3, or 4. So these are handy techniques. And of course, these are often used for column headings and row headings. So some shortcuts with autofill and just some basic thoughts and ideas about how we do data entry and editing in Excel. Excel has a great deal of computational capability when you work with dates and times. On this worksheet called Dates Times in the workbook 02 Entering Data, there's a date in cell B2. It's got slashes in it and refers to August 10th, 2018. In different cultures, you can display these differently so that the day is first. Now, anytime you're entering dates, you want to use slash or dash. If I type this same entry with a dash, 8-10-18, enter, I'll get the same display. Anytime you use slash or dash, Excel evaluates that information as if it could be a date, and if it is, it aligns it on the right-hand side of the cell. If you type a date that doesn't exist, for example, November 31st, and I'll even type in the 4-digit year here, when I press enter, Excel does something a little different. But the difference here is so subtle you wouldn't notice it. I do recommend in any column that has a date, from time to time, particularly during the data entry phase, keep that column a bit wider. I'm going to drag the boundary between B and C to the right, and that pops out. That is not a date. In effect, Excel is saying that's just a bunch of characters. Behind the scenes, and you don't need to know too much about this, but every single date has a separate value. Starting January 1st, 1900. And that means when you're entering this is actually a value. That's partially the reason why this is right aligned. And because it is a value, you can write formulas that refer to this. Or if you have two different dates, you could subtract them to calculate the difference. I think you can recognize how important that is in banking and finance and all kinds of different endeavors. If I write a formula right here, and I know some of you haven't yet worked with formulas, I'm going to type equal B2, that's this cell, plus 100. I'm going to be getting a date that's 100 days after August 10th. And there it is, November 18th. That's 100 days later. The formula adds 100 to it. And I just as easily could have subtracted that 100 also. When you work with times, enter them with colons. Now, you may choose to type AM, PM. If you're more familiar and prefer that style, you would type this same entry here as 4:43 space P. And of course, if we're AM, space A, so on. So you can use either style, and you can adjust them or switch when necessary as well, too. And here, too, behind the scenes, you actually have entered a value. It's a fractional part of the day. So if you were to type in, for example, 6 p.m., that's 3/4 of the day. The number 0.75 is being stored in the background. Maybe a little bit of trivia there, but still, as we enter these, and we do them in a standard way, using colons for time and using slash or dash with date, we will be able to work with these times and dates in a productive way. And on the Formulas tab in the ribbon, there are a whole bunch of functions related to date and time. We can calculate working days, net working days, not counting holidays, all kinds of features here related to dates and times, because it's a vital ingredient in many an Excel worksheet. When working with Excel, sometimes you'll make a mistake. I know I do. And from time to time, we've got a real life-saving feature available. It's called Undo, and it's got a companion called Redo. So imagine I'm a novice user of Excel. For whatever reason, I've got these cells highlighted, and I want to get rid of the word sales. I don't really have to do that. I could type over it, but I'm thinking that's the only cell there. If I press delete, shouldn't I get rid of the word sales? It looks different than the other ones to the right. I press delete. Well, obviously, that's in retrospect. I don't want to do that. So what do? Two different ways. There is a keystroke shortcut, Control-Z. I could press that now. At the top of the screen in the quick access toolbar, you will have an undo button. It's a counterclockwise arrow. When you slide over it, you'll see the word undo, followed by the action that was taken most recently, in this case, clear. And notice the keystroke shortcut. So I'll click it. And undo can remember up to 100 of your last steps. Now, it's highly unlikely you'd ever want to go back that far. And most Excel users, I think, only occasionally go back 3 or 4 steps. If you undo more than you wanted to undo, the category to the right here is called redo. Now, I just undid the clear, but I just undid falls into this category of redo. So I could undo the undo or redo, do it that way. The keystroke shortcut for redo is Control-Y. Now, as it turns out, of course, I would want to keep that, so I'll press Control-Z or that undo arrow at the top of the screen. So it's a really handy feature. It doesn't work for every single command, although it works for most of the commands. I'd say well over 90%. One category of commands that you can't undo relate to sheet tabs. Now, you might not be too familiar with these, but at the bottom of the screen, if I right-click on the current worksheet, which is called Undo Redo, I could delete the sheet, and I cannot undo that. Rename, well, I can't really undo it, but I can come back and change the name. So these features don't fall into the category of actions that we can undo. And there are also some features on the View tab, like freeze panes. Some of these we can't undo, but we can certainly take other actions to, in effect, come back to the same place that we want to come back to. So it's a valuable feature, and no question, at different times we make mistakes, and undo, and to a lesser extent redo, are really valuable. There could be one example, too, where you might create a chart that looks a certain way. You'll change the chart. You might want to sort of bounce back and forth between the two. Sometimes you use Control-Z and Control-Y back and forth as kind of a toggle. Or you could be using those buttons as well. But no question, a feature you'll use widely in Excel. When you start using Excel, you're likely to see a screen something like this. And if you choose blank workbook, you'll have a blank workbook. It's likely to have a name like book 1, sometimes book 2, book 3, if you create other workbooks later. Now, I'm going to put in a minimum amount of data here. I'll type in sales right here, and expenses, and then profits. And right here, I'll put in January, and drag that up to the right. I'll get to the numbers later, and I'll zoom in. That slider bar in the lower right-hand corner, drag that to the right. Now, periodically, when you work with Excel, you need to save your work. If there's a power failure right now, or if I accidentally turn off the computer, I've got to do this all over again. And what if I had filled in a lot of numbers here and formulas? What if it's a lot bigger and I haven't saved? When it comes time to save, though, you go to the File tab. There are 2 commands. Which one should we use, save or save as? If there's any doubt whatsoever about which command to use, always use save as. I'll use it here, but when you're saving a file for the first time, it makes no difference which one because they both take you to the same location. When we go to save as, your screen might look something like this. Again, there could be some differences here. I'm going to click Browse. One of the 3 things that we are concerned with when we save a file is where are we saving it? Is it on a flash drive? Is it on a hard drive? Is it on a network somewhere? Some of the previous choices out here could have led us down some of those paths. But if there's any question whatsoever about where we're trying to save it, or what the name of the file is going to be, or what the format of the file is going to be, that's when we want to use File Save As. And again, the first time you use File Save on a file that has not been saved at all, you're led here anyway. We need to give it a name. Book 1 isn't very descriptive. The name can have up to 255 characters. Stay away from most of the special characters. Dash and underline certainly work, but not slash and asterisk and most of those. So we give it an appropriate name. Maybe I'll call this Sales Report. And you can have spaces in the name as well, too. Rarely, but occasionally, you might need to save this in a different format. I'll click the drop arrow to the right of where we see Excel Workbook. Now, there could be situations where you need to save your file in a format readable by someone who has an older version of Excel, or you've got some kind of a Macintosh need here, or something that meets one of these other needs. We don't. And for most people, that's never a concern. Where we want to save it, again, screens will look different, but it might go into this folder or that folder, and you can scroll up and down and see various locations as to where you might want to save the file. We've given it a name, we click Save, and that name appears at the top of the screen. Well, imagine we put in some more numbers. I'm not going to do any more typing here, but we've done some more of this, and we need to save. What we really mean most of the time after saving a file for the first time is simply update. We don't see that term in the menu, but we can go to File Save and simply do that. Automatically, this is updated. Even better and slightly faster is the icon on the left side of the Quick Access toolbar, Save. Notice it has a keystroke shortcut, Control S. If you've got lots of data on your screen and you click that, there's a slight pause, and you'll see an indicator at the bottom of the screen, and then the file is saved. So most of the time, after saving a file for the first time, we're not trying to change its location or its name. We use File Save. But anytime we need any of those other 3 changes, either to the location or the name of the file or the file type, we use File Save As. For many Excel users, writing formulas is one of the most common things they do. Now, many times formulas are straightforward, they're simple, easy to use. They do start with a concept, though, that might surprise you a little bit. We want to calculate profits on this worksheet. Worksheet's called Formulas. It's in the workbook 03, Creating Formulas and Functions. The total here is going to be 20. We're going to be subtracting these 2 cells. But we don't type 120 or 100. All formulas in Excel begin with the equal sign. And although we can occasionally and want to use external numbers, most of the time we use addresses. We want to say, in effect, whatever is in B2, from that we want to take away whatever is in B3. So we write the formula, and this is one of 3 major ways to write a formula. We type in the location of the first cell, B2, minus B3. Enter or tab, we have our answer. Another way to type this, so I delete this entry, equal, then use the arrow keys to go to the cell you're interested. Writing a formula this way could be better, but the cells have to be somewhat nearby, otherwise it would take a long time to get there. Minus, We press the up arrow, the B3 pops in, enter. And a third way, might involve two hands, but equal, this time we'll click on cell B2. Minus, we click on cell B3. Enter. Same result in all three cases. No matter how you write the formula though, you want to learn to keep an eye on what we call the formula bar. It's at the top of the screen. In a certain sense, this cell doesn't really contain a 20, it contains a formula. Click on the cell above it. Yes, that does contain the value 100. We keep an eye on the formula bar, in much the same way we keep our eye on the rearview mirror in a car. Look there frequently. Now, we want a total in cell H2. If all we knew about formulas is what we previously saw, then we would do something like this. Equal, type or click on B2 plus C2 plus D2 and on and on and on. That is not the best way. Imagine trying to do that for 12 months too. I'll simply press escape. Built into Excel are over 450 functions. There's a ton of them. On the Formulas tab in the ribbon, you can track them down this way. A lot of times you're not sure what you need. There's some math and trig functions, some more out here, some statistical functions. Just a lot of them all over the place. The most common function in Excel for most people is probably sum. And like a formula, this begins with equal as well, sum. You don't have to capitalize it. Left parenthesis, you wouldn't know to do that instinctively, but that's what we do. And then we highlight the cells in question, either dragging left to right, B2 to G2, or right to left. Makes no difference. Click and drag across. That notation means all the cells from B2 through G2. And we press enter, and we have an answer. And in cell I2, we need to calculate an average. Of course, that's the total divided by 6. We need to add these up, but we've already done the addition right here. So the formula here is simply equal this cell H2, and the division symbol is the slash that looks like this, not the one that goes in the opposite direction, divided by 6, and enter. And we'll adjust that format perhaps later. Now, when we have formulas in place like this, and although we're not finished with this particular sheet, if I change this number 120, I'll change it to 125. Keep your eye on the 20 down here. It will change. We saw the formula, and these totals and averages to the right will change as well. And you can begin to see how powerful these formulas are and how we can make adjustments at different times. Also, if I go back to cell B3, I'll make a change here. This is going to change the profits. It won't change anything to the right since we don't have anything over there just yet, but sometimes we will see negatives, and that's what happens. The formula is reacting all the time. So in this movie, we've seen different techniques using mouse and keyboard for creating simple formulas. It's a task that's very important as you work with Excel. Many times in Excel, when you see a formula, you also want a similar formula in adjacent cells, either across a row or down a column. And we're looking at a worksheet here called Copy Formulas. It's in the workbook 03, Creating Formulas and Functions. Here's a formula in cell B4. I click on it, you can see in the formula bar, or I can double click it here, you can see it larger. We want that same kind of a formula here. We certainly don't want the exact formula because we get the answer 20. When you copy a formula in Excel, the important concept is you're copying a formula relatively. Now, I'm going to double click this again so we can see it larger. This formula refers to content in column B. If we drag it one column into the right, the column references will get adjusted to be column C. And then going to the right, D, E, F, G. When you copy formulas, they get adjusted relatively. Otherwise, you'd simply be repeating the exact same formula. And of course, the payoff is here. We don't want to type a formula here, then here, then here. And what if we were doing this for 12 months? That'd be kind of ridiculous, really time consuming. And the way we copy a formula is simply by dragging an entry from that lower right-hand corner. It's called the fill handle. So as I drag to the right from the fill handle into June, right away you can probably see those values are correct. What's this one right here? You can see it in the formula bar, or I'll double click, you can see it larger. So one by one we have correct formulas. And if we had 12 months, it would be all the more impressive. And similarly, in column H here, here's a formula. What is it doing? It's adding up the 6 cells to its left. Do we want to do that here? Yes, we do. And here, yes, we do. So just as in the examples over here, we were copying, you could say, the relationship. What is this formula over here? What did it do? It subtracts the 2 cells above it. We copy to the right. What does this one do? Same thing, and so on. Same general idea here, but now we're moving down a column. So I can simply drag that lower right-hand corner, and we have correct answers there. What does this one say? You You can see it in the formula bar, or as I double click, see it better. And similarly, in column I, the function here for average is the cell to its left divided by 6. We want to do that 2 more times. We'll drag that lower right-hand corner downward. So many times when you see a formula, you're likely to want to copy it, as we've seen here, down a column or across a row. And this technique of copying a formula by dragging the fill handle is absolutely essential when you work with formulas and list the way we're saying them here. We started off seeing only 3 formulas in this worksheet, and we created the other formulas simply by dragging the fill handle. In this list of numbers that we're seeing here on the screen, just at a glance, it looks like a bunch of numbers. These are numbers. All the rest are formulas. So as you work with Excel, there'll be many times when you need to copy formulas, like we've seen in the examples in this movie. Whenever you're trying to add up numbers in a column or a row, or coming up with an average of those numbers, you can rely on 2 of Excel's most commonly used functions, sum and average. Now, there's a menu button, there's a keystroke shortcut. They're going to help in your use of these functions. We're looking at this worksheet called Sum Average. It's in the workbook 03, Creating Formulas and Functions. We want a total in cell G2. We want to add up the data. You might have seen in an earlier movie, we could start typing equal SUM, left parenthesis, highlight the data, and so on. Nothing wrong with that, but there's a better way. There's a faster way. 2 faster ways. On the Home tab, in the editing group on the right side, you'll see a button called Auto Sum. If you click this button, Excel looks upward for data, then it looks leftward. In this case, no numbers appear above it, but certainly leftward. We click this button, Excel shows us what it's about to do. We're going to press enter. After using that for a few times, you become a little bit more confident with it. You can speed it up a little bit. You can double click Auto Sum. Click, click. There it is. There's our total. And what has it done for us? It's put in the sum function. If I double click on the cell here as a reminder, you can also see this in the formula bar. We see what it's done. Similarly, in cell B9, we could use that same button. And by the way, that button also appears on the Formulas tab in the ribbon. As I click the Formulas tab, it's on the left side, so it's in 2 locations. It's also got a keystroke shortcut. I'm going to press Alt equal. Looks good. I'll press enter. Same general idea, same approach. Another thought here too, as I delete this entry, if you highlight cells ahead of time, you can either press the Auto Sum button once or Alt equal once. I'll press Alt equal this time. Total on the bottom. Could have pressed the Auto Sum button. Sometimes you'll run into a slight conflict, not a major one here. What happens here if you press Auto Sum or Alt equal? Here's Auto Sum. Excel looks upward. But I wanted to add up the data to the left. What do? I'll simply highlight those cells instead. Excel sees that. Enter. All set. If we want totals on the right side, in rows 12 through 15, we can highlight these cells. And we'll take one of 2 actions. We'll either click the Auto Sum button or we'll press Alt equal. And in either case, that's it. We don't have to do anything else. That's it. I'll delete that. Similarly, across the bottom, we could do the same thing. And a surprise, perhaps, if we highlight the data this way, in other words, include the empty cells on the right and on the bottom, we can click either Auto Sum button or Alt equal. Either way, we get our totals on the right. So for example, this cell right here is doing what? It's adding up these cells. Same thing down here, and so on. And down here, in row 16, we're adding up this way. Cell in the corner is doing this. So that's easy. And here's another action. I'm going to press Control Z. If you wanted an average on the right-hand side, Auto Sum has a little drop arrow right here. And what do we see? Average. Now we're going to be getting an average on the right side and on the bottom. And there are decimals there. Eventually we would change the format to produce a more standard look. Now, I'm going to make a statement here that might sound a little strange. Never type equal SUM. Well, why not? It's certainly not wrong to type it, and we could fill in other data here. But when you press Alt equal, Excel does that for you. Now, it might make a bad guess. I don't want to add that up, but I can point to other cells that I do want to add. Maybe you want to add up these cells over here. Point is, you can redirect it. And why type equal SUM when Excel does it for you by pressing Alt equal? So these are valuable tools as you work with formulas in Excel. There's no question that the sum function and the average function are widely used by most Excel users. The Auto Sum button, it's keystroke shortcut, Alt equal, and occasionally use that drop arrow next to Alt equal. All these make tabulating sums and averages, and occasionally other functions too, really fast and efficient. In the previous movie, you saw how to use the sum and average functions. On this worksheet called Functions, we're about to use a function that you might not need if you're just getting started with Excel, but eventually you are likely to use what is the third most frequently used function in Excel. It's called VLOOKUP. It has a companion called HLOOKUP, and as of late August of 2019, a new function being introduced called XLOOKUP actually will replace VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP. And the whole idea behind a function like this is to allow you to pull together related information. Now, sometimes when you're doing this, you're working with different worksheets at the same time. In the simple example we're going to show you here, we've got a list in column G of some ID numbers, and we need to associate them with an employee name. And over in columns A through D, we've got a huge list, thousands of rows potentially. And rather than sorting the data and jumping back and forth to try and find these IDs, let's actually use this XLOOKUP function, the new XLOOKUP function. And by the way, that function does, in addition to combining the capabilities of these two functions, it introduces some new efficiencies and also gets over some of the limitations of the other two functions. Equal XLOOKUP. I'm about to type this in cell H2. If you've never worked with functions beyond sum and average, you're a little bit surprised perhaps as you type in a function name, you put in a left parenthesis, you will be seeing some indications as to what is required. And optionally within brackets, some additional features too. This doesn't tell you everything you need to know. But most of the time when you use XLOOKUP, you'll be saying, I've got a value, for example, the one in G2. We can click this or type in G2. We then put in a comma. Now we see highlighted lookup array. Where are we looking? We are looking in column C. And I'll simply, with the left mouse button, click column C, comma, and what are we looking for? We see the pop-up return array. We're looking to find the related information over in column A. And that's all we need to do in this particular example. I'll press enter. You don't have to put in a right parenthesis when using a function by itself. I'll press enter, and we have an answer. Now we're not verifying that just yet, but we do want to copy this formula down the column, point to the lower right-hand corner, that fill handle, hold down the left mouse button, and drag down here. Now possibly one of those IDs is visible on the screen over here. In fact, the last one is, here's David Diaz right here, 30573. We happen to see that information right here in row 8. And there he is with 30573. So that's working there. And also Juan Bishop here up in row 4. So we see at least two examples where it's working, so we're assuming they're all working. Let me also, as I click on the cell up here in H2, and we can see it in the formula bar. I'll also double click momentarily so you can see it in more detail. We're looking up G2, trying to find it in column C. When we find it, we jump into column A and return that amount. We could not have done this with VLOOKUP because it cannot look leftward. That's what we're doing here. So this overcomes that limitation. And over in column K, something similar. This time we're looking ID, and almost the same idea, except this time we'll be looking rightward. The lookup function, XLOOKUP, we're looking at cell J2, comma. Once again, we're looking in column C, comma. And when we find that match, we want to go into column D to find the compensation amount. And enter. And here too, like before, we'll drag from that lower right-hand corner, click and drag with the left mouse button downward. And one of those numbers might exist over there. This is 111,283. I think we have that over, yes we do, over in row 9. That's for Adam Frost. And his ID is 26621. That matches up with what we see over here in column J. Now, many times, and this is well beyond the scope of this course, you're likely to encounter VLOOKUP in a much more sophisticated situation. And here too, XLOOKUP will fill the bill. Two large lists, one in column N through R, another one in column U through Z. Many times when you're trying to reconcile information in lists or pull them together, turn them into one list, you'd be looking at VLOOKUP and now an XLOOKUP to pull together the information from these different lists. A powerful function in Excel, XLOOKUP. Whether it's for greater readability, increased emphasis, or simply a matter of personal taste, you might want to change the font as we see it being used in Excel. The native font of Excel is called Calibri. And on the Home tab in the ribbon, we've got a font group. Now, all but 2 of the buttons in here are related to what we call fonts. The standard font in Excel is 11, and much of the time we keep it that way. But for titles and special emphasis, sometimes we'll choose a different size. I'm going to click on cell A1. Notice the font change in the ribbon now says Candera before it said Calibri. This is size 20. Maybe I want that font to be larger or smaller. Click the drop arrow, and as we slide over the numbers, immediately you see what's happening. And at different times you'll have different reasons for changing this. While we're here, just to the left, that Candera font may or may not be to your liking, but as we click the drop arrow here, it opens the door to quite a few choices, some of which perhaps would be completely inappropriate in a business environment. But as you slide over these, you might get some ideas. And occasionally it might be fun to use these in certain environments. We can change these at any time. In Microsoft Word, the native font is Times New Roman. A lot of people use that for titles. There's Times New Roman. Currently it's bold. That's certainly a feature. A lot of times we want to apply it to text to make it stand out. How's that look without bold? Well, maybe that's okay. How about italics? Sometimes you want to offset data here by using some of the font features. Maybe all these numbers or just these here possibly. We'll make them bold. Making italic, well, maybe not, but we can do that too. And we can underline as well too. I don't think we need that here really, but again, you experiment from time to time. Here's underlining. And these 3 buttons are what we call toggle buttons. They're all on off. So at different times you come back and remove the feature. Same thing with italic, same thing with bold. There's a little drop arrow to the right of underline. We can use double underlining. And back later, underline, and maybe back later, we don't want to use that at all. So you can quickly get the feel for those too. So we offset our data sometimes. Now there are other capabilities as well, and we don't see them necessarily on the Home tab. Lots of formatting choices, quite a few font choices, but there's a little arrow in the lower right-hand corner here. Slide over that, you get some ideas, but when you click that button, and by the way, it's referred to as a dialog box launcher, it brings up the Format Cells dialog box. And there are lots of choices here, and you could even switch into other tabs if you wanted to. But not only are we seeing the choices that already appear in the ribbon menu, we see some additional ones. For example, here's kind of underlining single accounting, double accounting. If you click that and watch the preview to the right, you'll see the difference there. That may or may not be important to you, but it's another aspect of it. We've got superscript and subscript. As I cancel here for the moment and scroll down a bit on the left-hand side of the screen, if you were to make either of these entries, you couldn't quite get them this way unless you were to edit the number 2 in each case and put in either superscript or subscript. And looking down column A, there's a strike through. That's also available in that same location. And you can also quickly get into that same dialog box at any time by pressing Control 1. It won't always necessarily take you to the Font tab, but here we can get to some of these other features that we mentioned, superscript, subscript. And sometimes you'll come here and apply a bunch of features at the same time. In other words, change the font style and the size, and maybe even the color. When you change the color of font, be careful. If you're using numbers, making them red sometimes denotes negative, so you want to be careful with that. If I use it here on cell A26, that's probably not going to be too significant. I'll make it purple maybe or blue. And of course, a lot of these colors don't work so well on a white background, but we see that effect too. So we've got different reasons at different times for changing either the font or the font size or the font color and some of the other related features related to fonts by way of this button, the dialog box launcher, which brings us into the Format Cells dialog box on the Font tab. In addition to the many different ways to display fonts in Excel, you also have a variety of border options and color background choices to accentuate your data. And both of these features are found on the Home tab in adjacent buttons. Here's a Borders button right here, and just to the right of it, the Fill Color bucket. I want a border around these cells. They're the only cells within this worksheet that are pure numbers. I want the data to stand out just with a border around it. Clicking the drop arrow on the right side of the Borders button reveals all kinds of choices. How about thick outside borders? Now, many times when you apply a borders features, you're not quite sure if it worked until you click outside of the highlighted area. Well, we've got a border there. In other words, you just can't see it as clearly while it's highlighted. I'll come back here and maybe try a few others. We could put a border on every single cell. How about all borders? It has that look. And there's one other approach to this too. Cells are highlighted. We'll come back again with a border and consider the very bottom, more borders. And maybe we want to use color here as well. So how about color for starters here? We use a dark red. And maybe a certain line type. How about a dash line? And then, as we apply it to the grid to the right, we could choose outline first. You see the red dashed outline. How about the inside of the cells as well too? So we're getting a preview ahead of time. And there's some unusual choices here like diagonal lines, which I think you wouldn't need to use very often. Let's click OK. And now we've got that effect. Another approach to borders is with these cells highlighted, let's say you wanted those to stand out in a certain way. Here's that drop arrow. This time we could draw border. We could draw a border around the perimeter. Or, you saw the other choice there, draw a border grid. And we could have chosen color before this. I didn't, but we could draw the grid that way too. So multiple ways of putting in borders in the example here. Now, color background's an easy choice, and sometimes people go overboard with this. We might want these cells to stand out in addition to the border or without the border, either way. Here's the fill color bucket. If the color that's there, that's visible, is the one you use, just click the bucket. There it is, it's yellow. If you use another color, you want to be sure that it's fairly light so that the text shows through. That's not so good there, and this is pretty bad. I think you can quickly see what's going on here. And if you just can't find that color you want, well, come back again and go into more colors and probably spend way too much time looking at this. 127 different choices, but if it's got to be a certain color, you can make that choice. And again, we tend to use these to make certain parts of a worksheet stand out, give it more emphasis, more pizzazz. Sometimes we say it that way. So a variety of different techniques here using either border features and or color background, both located on the Home tab to provide greater emphasis to our worksheets. You can easily adjust the width of columns and the height of rows, and nearly always you don't need to go into the menu system, but instead use the actual boundaries between columns and between rows. On this worksheet, if you look at columns B, C, D, etc. across the top, the column widths are probably not the same. Now, it's fairly subtle, and sometimes you care, sometimes you don't. But if we wanted to make a column wider, a standard method is not necessarily to go into the Home tab, and you can do that ultimately off to the right. Under Format, you'll see some choices there. But why not just say, if we want column D to be narrower, we point to the boundary between columns D and E, the actual letters. Click and drag a bit leftward or rightward. And this is quite a common technique. As we do this, we do see the size. Most of the time, we probably don't care. It's 131 pixels, now it's 137. More likely is this idea, you probably would want these to all be the same. If the numbers that we're seeing here are in the same, more or less, frame, they're not above 1,000, they're all above 100. So if we want all of these to be the same, we can highlight all the columns dragging across the top and simply double-click one of the boundaries. And what's happening there is that this column, I'll simply hold down left mouse button on the border there, that's 99 pixels. Now how about the one over here? That's 99 pixels. All of these are, and sometimes that's the need. Column H seems to be a lot wider than it needs to be. If we adjust it only, what can we do? We'll double-click the boundary between H and I. Double-click, so-called best fit. What's the fit of that? And again, most of the time we don't care, but just for comparison, that's 118. So at any time, you want to have that sense of freedom that says, well, if the column's too wide, we can adjust it. If it's too narrow, we can make it wider, and so on. With numerical columns, if you manually make them too narrow, you'll see this effect. You'll see those hashtags there. Sometimes when you're zooming in and out, using that slider bar in the lower right-hand corner, you might see this on other cells as well, too. I'm not seeing any right here at the moment, but sometimes you will see them. And it's not any fault of yours, it's just an adjustment you'll need to make in Excel. For example, I can make some of these narrower there. There we see it. But if I zoom now, you see that slider bar in the lower right corner, we still might see some pound signs, hashtags. There they are, and no real change to the data right now. But as we change the zoom factor, we see them again. So we quickly get over this idea. And I'll double-click column G again. Maybe we'll leave it like that. Now, what if we say this? We want each of these columns here, January through June, to be a little bit wider, but we want them all to be the same. Then we'll simply drag across just these columns, point to any border here, drag it to a certain width. Once again, we're probably not really counting pixels, but if we drag it right here and let go, they're all going to be exactly the same width. Now, this cell A1 could be merged. Eventually, we might want to merge it, but we haven't done that just yet. And you might not be familiar with that feature. So what if I'm saying, let's make all the columns be a so-called best fit? Maybe H is too wide, I is too wide, February is too narrow. Let's adjust them all at once. What do? Click in the upper left corner. I'll double click. That means best fit. But look what happens. Because this is in column A has been readjusted to handle that data. But if we merge this, and I'll do it right now, drag across this and all those other cells out into column I, we can use this merge and center button. There it is. And now, if we click in the upper left corner, readjust those column widths, see what happens. So we can easily make adjustments here. If I wanted to print this out for some analysts and we wanted to have some space between the rows here, we could insert rows, or better yet, let's just change the row height. So I'm going to drag across just these 4 rows here, and then point to one of the row boundaries. Maybe make these twice as tall, 3 times as tall, something like that. Let go, and we see that effect. And we could, if we wanted to, although major here, we could highlight these, and on the Home tab, we could put these in the middle of the cell from the top bottom. And after a while, if you want to return this list to its more normal appearance, click in the upper left corner, then double-click any row boundary. So for all the different methods we saw here for adjusting column widths and row heights, we relied on dragging columns or row boundaries or double-clicking on those boundaries instead of going through the menu system. And these are techniques that you will use frequently as you work with Excel. It's not uncommon to need to add a new column in a worksheet or a new row. On this worksheet, it's called Insert Delete. It's in the file 05 layout. I'm going to add a new record above Diane Andrews here. So I'm going to right-click row 3 and insert. And I'll type in the information. But in this worksheet, maybe I forgot something. I'm scrolling to the right here. There's other data off to the right. Now, worse things could happen. I didn't delete any data, but I introduced cells over there that I really shouldn't have. So let's undo this. Control Z. What can we do? Let's just highlight these cells right here and be sure, as we do right click this time, not on the row number, but within the highlighted area. Right click. This time insert is followed by 3 dots. That means there will be a dialog box appearing. And there it is. And what do we want to do? Shift cells down. Click OK. We'll put in the data later, but off to the right, we have not disrupted. Now, if it's a case of delete, this is going to be much more serious. First of all, let me undo this, Control Z. At a later time, I'm saying, Danielle here has left the organization. Let's just get rid of her records here, all that information. We right-click and delete. And of course, you know what's happened here. I wasn't paying attention, and what happened? Well, we lost some data off to the right. And by the way, sometimes when you do this, it's not obvious until maybe it's too late. But it certainly happened here and disrupted this table. We've got a missing entry there, and we lost a state or something over there. We're not sure. Obviously, we'd want to undo that too. And similar, as with insert, we take the same kind of action. If we want to get rid of the data here for Danielle Atkinson, we highlight just these cells and right-click within them, choose delete, and this time shift cells up. So the information about her will disappear. Nothing will happen anywhere to the right of column I. Her data's gone, and nothing got changed over here. At other times, you might want to insert a column. We need a new column here for phone number. We want it to be to the left of column D, so we right-click on column D and insert. We'll put in the phone number here and add the data later. So it turns out I don't need that. Right-click and delete. You're much less likely to need to insert cells within a column, as we saw with the row. On the next worksheet over, it's called Hide Unhide. We're about to print this. We just don't want to print Social Security number. So right-click column D and hide the column. A quick print preview is Control P, and there's no gaping hole in here to indicate there ever was any data there anyway, and we didn't need to print it, so that's the perfect solution there. We'll print it eventually. Let's press Escape, come back. At a later time, we need to get it back, so we drag across those 2 columns. That's where the hidden column is. Right-click and unhide is certainly one way to do it. Another way, I'll press Control Z again to undo the action. Drag across these cells, double-click the column boundary, and that causes the data to reemerge as well too. Always be on the lookout for hidden columns. I've been surprised over the years how often I have missed them and haven't thought about it. And what if, for example, I'm going to hide column B, hide column I? Maybe some other columns are hidden way off to the right. It's a larger worksheet, perhaps. How do we get back all of these hidden columns? Click in the upper left corner. That selects the entire worksheet. And then what? We can either right-click a column and choose Unhide, or double-click any column boundary. Double-click means best fit. Double-click, all the hidden columns reemerge. But always be on the lookout for them. You'd be surprised how often they can be easily overlooked. Same thing with rows. They're less likely to be hidden, but in the list to the left here, the Insert Delete worksheet, if we're hiding all the people in a certain department here, we don't want them in the printout here, I'll hide this group right here. Drag across these, right-click and hide. Now, when you copy and save and print and use this worksheet, a lot of times you're not looking down there. Do you assume automatically as you're working with the data that that data is there? Well, you might scroll up and down, but you might not. So even here, if it's unfamiliar data or data you haven't seen in a while, not a bad idea. Click on the upper left corner to select the entire worksheet. Either double-click any row boundary or right-click and unhide. In this case, we did get the data back. So, valuable features. And notice that all these commands were done with the right mouse button or by double-clicking. We didn't use any of the standard menu choices. If you've worked with Microsoft Excel for any length of time, or perhaps with Microsoft Word, you've come to appreciate the value of copying by a two-step process, copy-paste, or moving data by a two-step process of cut and paste. But many times, after selecting data, a simple drag will let you move or copy data easily. We're looking at a worksheet called Move, Copy, Insert. It's in the workbook 05 layout. I'd like to make a copy of this data and experiment with some of the numbers, or maybe I want to make a copy of the data and do it for the second half of the year. So I've got all this data highlighted like this. So rather than doing a copy-paste, which certainly isn't wrong, I'm just going to point to one of the edges here and start to drag. Now, at some point in the process, a tiny little plus accompanies that arrow. So a so-called control drag, that's what I'm doing right now. I drag the data down to here, let go of the mouse, and there's a copy. The formula right here in cell B21 refers to those two cells, not the ones up above. So formulas generally are not a problem when you copy data. Now, I'm going to undo that. Control Z. Sometimes you simply want to move data. And unless you're moving in hundreds of rows, many times it's going to be easier simply to drag data. Similar to what we just did with the copy. This time we hold down no keys on the keyboard. We got our data highlighted. We drag an edge. We put it there or over there if the case were appropriate. Fine, we move it wherever we want. And that's generally the easier way to do it. Now, if you look at this worksheet for a bit, something is a little bit off. We've got sales, expenses, and profits in rows 4, 5, and 6. And here we're analyzing the sales change, but somehow or other, this is profits and this is expenses. Now, a standard technique here would be what? To insert some new cells above this. Now, one option could be we could take this data, move it down, then move the expenses up. But why not do this in more or less a single action after selecting the data? You can move and insert by dragging data with the Shift key. So I'd like to drag this data upward, put it between what are now in rows 9 and 10, but I'll be holding down the Shift key as I do this. Got the Shift key held down, I'm dragging the top edge upward. Let go of the mouse first, and there we are. A move and insert. And I've got some data off to the right, and for whatever reason, I want to move some of that in a similar way. I want the hire date to be to the left of the Social Security number column. So I click column Q, I'm going to be dragging the left edge. I've got the Shift key held down, I drag it this way. So you can drag left or right, you can do it with multiple columns. It just saves time, so we don't have to insert new columns, move and delete and so on. And so the more you get comfortable with these commands, the more you have the sense that no matter how the worksheet looks, you can easily redesign the look of a worksheet layout by moving data, copying data, or in some cases, moving and inserting data at the same time. Whether you're looking for data within a list or maybe trying to replace data with other data, the Find and Select button is found on the right side of the Home tab, magnifying glass, is where we find these features. Now, in this worksheet here, I'm looking for people who have retirement benefits. I'm looking for the letter R here. Now, do notice the letter R appears with some of these D's and M's, sometimes all three of them, sometimes with two of them. But I'm thinking out loud here, I want to find the R's. Anytime you are trying to find and possibly replace, Be sure to narrow down the scope of where you're searching. We're only looking here in column H, so let's select that, and then go to the button, Find and Select. Let's do a find here. Let's find these R's. When you come to this dialog box, it might have been expanded. There's an Options button to the right. Sometimes you will want to get to some of these other features, sometimes not. I'll collapse it for now. So I'm looking for a capital R here. I could find next, I'll click this, and the active cell is now H2. Why? Because there's an R in there. Find the next, there's an R. There's an R by itself, but that's what I was looking for all along. I just want those that are R by themselves. So what can I do here? That Options button, match entire cell contents, meaning I want to find R when that's the entire cell. Put that check on, and now find next. We'll go to the next cell there, that's in cell H6, but we're gonna skip over, as I click next here, the entry in row 8, and go all the way down to row 16, where we see an R by itself. So you can imagine certain situations where you do want this box checked. And you could probably imagine scenarios where the data you're looking for must be uppercase or must be lowercase. At certain points, this box needs to be checked as well too. And at other times, you could even be checking for content and a format. If we want to find only the R's that have blue backgrounds, we could go into the Format button. So we've got a lot of different combinations here. Now, sometimes what we want to do is find and replace. Let's imagine that this company has decided that they no longer want to use the phrase halftime, because some of the halftime people are really 0.4 or 0.6. We want to use the phrase part-time. So we want to make sure that every time we see half in here, we change it to part. And we don't have to refer to the entire entry here. So we click column G, find and select, this time replace. And actually it's the same dialog box. Every time we see half, we want to replace it with part. Now, match entire cell contents, not this time, because no cell in column G has just the word half. So we do not want to match entire cell contents here. And let's just replace them all. It's done, 83 replacements. And you can see there's a part-time, there's another one down there. We don't have half-time in the list at all anymore. So find and replace. Ultimately the same dialog box, we get there by way of the find and select command. An easy feature to use, and yet a vital one as we're trying to repair data or fix data or find information within a list. Excel's printing capability is quite extensive and there are lots of options. It can be a little confusing at times, however, because we're going to be seeing similar terms located at different parts of the screen and certain features that you can get to in a variety of different ways. If you've never printed before, first thought might be, well, I've heard about print file tab, right? File, print. Sounds right. Well, you get a print preview and that's good. You might be a little surprised as you look at the bottom of the screen, and you should always do this, 52 pages, that seems like a lot. You can scroll up and down the list if you wish. Sometimes if it's large, it might take a while to get through this, but what could surprise you in this case here is, looks as if Excel's going to pick up maybe the left side of the screen, then the right side, and this is still going on. It's only like halfway through here, 25 pages. Where are we here? 30 pages? Excel is trying to print everything. You probably didn't mean that. Let's escape from here. I'm going to scroll to the right and point out that this worksheet has data way off to the right. Excel assumes you want to print everything unless you indicate otherwise, so we could approach this a little bit differently. Why don't we highlight the data we're interested in? Maybe we only want to print the data from column J leftward. We could click across this way, highlight that, and use what's called the Page Layout tab in the ribbon. There's some other printing choices here too. How about Print Area, Set Print Area? Then we could go into Print Preview. Another quick way to get to Print Preview, keystroke shortcut, Control P. Here we are. You'll see this button to the right, show Print Preview. Now it says 34 pages. Looks like we're on the right path here. Again, kind of scrolling quickly through this, we get a sense of, we see the left side of our data, then the right side. It didn't go pick up anything to the right of that, so we're looking better there. What might we do next? Escape from here? Is hide some columns that we don't really need in our printout. Maybe we don't need this information here. Maybe not this one either. Now, sometimes, of course, you will want this, but certainly one thought at times, let's hide these columns. Print preview again, Control P, show print preview, 17 pages. That sounds about right for now. But how about those headings that says printing? That's the name of the file that we're looking at. Let's escape from here. Our file name is 06 Printing. We're on this page layout sheet. So Excel's showing us stuff that we don't necessarily want on this printout that we're about to make. In the lower right-hand corner of the screen, in this area below the sheet tabs, it's called the status bar. You might see statistics here if cells have been highlighted, but off to the right are 3 buttons. Normal view is what most of us use most of the time, but the next button over is called Page Layout. That's the same name we see at the top of the screen in a tab. Page Layout. Now I've got an image of the sheets here. If you click here, suddenly we see something kind of cryptic. What's going on here? On the Design tab up above, notice we've got a contextual tab here. We could be printing the file name, the sheet name, but maybe we don't want to. Take that out. Maybe we want the date. Left side, right side. We've got 3 different sections here. And by using some of the features up above, date, time, whatever, we can insert some automatic entries. Now, if you put in current date, there too, it looks a bit strange at first. On the right, I'll put in the current time. There's another button up there for time. But to see what these are going to look like, just click below it, down in the data. It's going to look like that. Maybe that's what we want. So let's do a Control P again, see how that's looking. Show print preview, and we see the times there, dates. You'll come to realize that when you print, there's a lot of back and forth. And if you're going to be working with this workbook and worksheet a lot, most of the printing adjustments are done up front. You don't have to constantly redo this next time you print. So one other option here too that we want to consider, scrolling up and down, we're on page 2, page 3. What happened to the heading? Well, it's only on page 1. Once again, let's escape from here. And now we're going back to the top of the screen. Page layout, the page layout tab from up here. Print titles, you'd want to do that. Rows to repeat at top, click in here. And in the background, we can click row 1. Now, if we were on normal view, we'd be clicking in the same relative space. Right now, we're in page layout view in the background. Print preview is the button right here. Click it. There's page 1. I'm using the mouse wheel to roll. There's page 2, page 3, etc. So, and there's some other features off to the left that we didn't use. A lot of you are familiar with the term portrait and landscape. Landscape would not be a good choice here, but watch the screen. And now we see the data that way. At other times, of course, you'll reverse it. So not a good choice here. We go back to the other option, portrait. So at different times, you'll be making some adjustments over here. At some point, we will print. So different approaches to printing, starting perhaps with the page layout tab and also in the lower right-hand corner, the page layout view. And in the next movie, you'll see some other approaches to printing that begin with different commands and printing features. In this workbook, 06 Printing, the second sheet in is called Page Break Preview Sheet. That reminds us that there is a Page Break Preview button. It's located in the status bar at the bottom of the screen below the sheet tabs, off to the right. Button on the left is Normal. Next button over is Page Layout. You might have seen how that works in the previous movie. And then to the right, Page Break Preview. Usually when you make this choice, Excel zooms back a bit. Excel assumes that I want to print the entire active part of this worksheet. I'm going to scroll to the right. I didn't indicate what it is I wanted to print, but that is what happens when we choose Page Break Preview. On the far right, you'll see a blue line. The page numbering at first might strike you as strange. They refer to these as watermarks, but off to the left we see page 1, then page 18. So if I were to scroll down relatively quickly, page 1, 2, 3, etc., this goes down to page 17. Excel assumes I want to print everything, and of course I don't in this case. So what do? Grab that solid blue line on the right and just pull it in. I don't want to print any of that. Now, I certainly could if I wanted to, or print it later by itself. I'm going to cut it off right there. If I do nothing special now and print, you see what's going to be happening. Columns A through G will be printed one by one on all those pages. Then I'll jump over and print this part because it says page 18. Now, will this fit on the page and be readable? I don't know, but here's a dotted line. I'll click and drag it to the right. And let's go look at Print Preview. I can either press Control P, nice keystroke shortcut, or go to the File tab and choose Print. We'll be in the same place. There it is. It says 13 pages at the bottom. That's looking pretty good. Is that too dense, too tight? Can't tell from here necessarily. Not a bad idea. Print one page. Off to the left, print, put in a 1 here, a 1 over there, and print just that, and then assess it. As you might have seen in a previous movie, sometimes what we do is just escape and decide, well, maybe some of these columns we didn't need to print, then it won't look so crowded anyway. Maybe we don't need both compensations or the benefits maybe. Drag across here, right-click hide. Let's reassess that print again. Control P, fast way to get there. Well, now it might look a little strange. Something else you can do, though, that makes sense at times, and you wouldn't instinctively go there, but when you're getting a print preview, off to the left, you'll see some choices, possibly make some margin changes. But I'm going to suggest, how about page setup? People who've used Excel for a while will recognize this dialog box. 4 tabs here, with lots of different choices. We could click margins and control the amount of white space on either side or on top. That can help in some cases. We could customize our header footer this way. We could go to the Sheet tab here, not show the grid lines, make some other choices. But on the Page tab, we might consider here, instead of this being 76, we could change this. Would this look better if it were 90? Or how about 100? What does that mean? We don't always know. Let's just click OK and watch our preview. 13 pages right now in the background. What is it now? 34 pages. That probably wasn't a great choice. So let's go back to page setup. Sometimes by altering this and jumping back and forth, it'll make some sense. I'll lower this to 90. One more time here. How's that looking? 16 pages, maybe that's the choice. But we're not always finished. We can go back to page setup, make some other choices. Now, oddly enough, if you're back in the Excel normal view, I'll simply press Escape here. On the Page Layout tab, this group of options here is referred to as Page Setup. We just saw that as the name of the dialog box. Click right here. We're back to here. So sometimes you'll make your choices here before getting the print preview. And after making a choice here, here's a print preview button. So maybe go to Sheet. Let's not show the grid lines. That has nothing to do with the regular display in the background, but our print preview will show this list without grid lines. That may or may not be your choice, but on the other hand, sometimes it might be. And once again, as we scroll here, something else could be missing is that top row, so we could escape here. How about page setup here? We go to Sheet tab here, rows to repeat at top. How about row 1? Click there, print preview, back here, back and forth. It's not uncommon to be making these choices, jumping back and forth between the preview and the actual printing. Sometimes you want to print just one page. But eventually you'll get it figured out which way is going to work best for you. And that page break preview button in the lower right-hand corner is a good starting point. Creating a chart in Excel, which is nothing other than a visual representation of numeric data, is surprisingly easy, and you can quickly embellish it with a variety of visual effects. And let's be clear, the term we use is chart. You might call it a graph, but officially and formally in Excel, we talk about charts. And we're about to create one with this set of data right here, starting in columns D through I. Before creating a chart, highlight the data that you want to show. And it must include some values, otherwise you'll have pretty much of an empty chart. If you do have totals next to your data, leave them off. Totals and details don't work so well together. Always include the row that you typically have on top of the data that describes each column, and the column that you typically have on the left side that describes each row. And if you're in a hurry, you can use a great keystroke shortcut combination, Alt F1. That's using the function key F1. Alt F1 immediately creates what we call a clustered column chart. These vertical columns, remind yourself, it's a column chart, and to be a little bit more specific, a clustered column chart. As soon as you see the chart, you might notice at the top of the screen, we've got a new ribbon, Chart Tools, with 2 contextual tabs, a Design tab, the more important of the two, and a Format tab. Format has a lot to do with fine-tuning of the visuals. Design has some important buttons on it that we'll see. And your eye is probably already attracted to these choices here. I'm sliding over these, not clicking, and we see lots of different variations here. It kind of makes you look like a pro in no time at all. That really stands out. How did you do that? Well, didn't take too long, did it? And there's a drop arrow here, and there's even more of them. So sometimes we'll gravitate toward these. I'll just pick one of these. The black one certainly stands out on the left. I'll click and move that. And we can easily change to another one if we wish. To move a chart, you either click and drag any of its borders or just inside the border, move it to where you wish. If you'd like to resize it and keep that same ratio of height to width, point to one of the corner handles, they're called, also some on the sides. I'm holding down the left mouse button so I can make this chart narrower or wider, taller, and go anywhere I want. But if I hold down the Shift key, I'm making it bigger or smaller while retaining that same ratio of height to width. And sometimes you want to do that. Let go of the mouse first. If you want the boundaries of the chart to line up with the cell boundaries in the background, take one of these corner handles, hold down the Alt key, let go of the mouse first, and maybe do it from the opposite corner. And not truly necessary, but sometimes you might want to consider doing that. So an Alt drag causes the boundaries of the chart to match up with the cell boundaries in the background. And that's one of many different chart types, as we'll see in the next movie. Now, I've got some other data over here. I'm going to highlight this. If I want a chart on a separate sheet, the keystroke shortcut F11. Keep your eye on the sheet tabs at the bottom. We're currently on the Creating Sheets. We are currently looking at the sheet called Creating Charts in this workbook 07 Charting. As I press the Function key F11, suddenly we're on a new sheet and there's a chart. Now we have the same features available at the Design tab, a Format tab, but we're not seeing our data. The advantage could be you're focused strictly on the chart, you're going to make some changes, change the appearance of it, that sort of thing. You're not looking at the data at all, and maybe you'll be printing this or displaying this by itself. I think there's probably a tendency to maybe have the chart next to the data. But either way, I'll go back to Creating Charts, and we've got our data here. A more standard way to create a chart by way of the menu system is, with the data highlighted, we go to the Insert tab in the ribbon. We could start with Recommended Charts, and I think this is a great button because when you click this, you get some ideas as to how your data could be displayed. Here are 4 examples. And as you see these two, you start to become familiar with some of the names that we see here. So we could pick one of these here. Maybe this one is going to look better. Try that. Looks good. Click OK. And there's a chart. And here too, we might want to resize it. It's all a question of how many of these charts do you want to have on the same sheet and where do you want to put them. So it's easy to create these. And there's another way to create a chart. When you highlight a list of data that includes numbers like this, what pops up in the lower right-hand corner is Quick Analysis button. Click it. There's charts, and we see some choices here. And we can go down that path if we wanted to. And there's another way. As you become more familiar with these, you'll go to the Insert tab and pick the chart type that you know you want from the beginning. And there's more about chart types in the next movie. So this is an appealing feature. Keep in mind, too, this idea, a chart is always in sync with the data. So in this chart here, this chart that's based on the data over in columns A and B, if the data somehow got recorded incorrectly, and this number for Den here should have been 3 million instead of 2 million, I'm going to double click in cell B11 and change that initial 2 to be a 3. And as I press enter, you'll see this Den bar to the right here get substantially wider. And there it is. So it's always in sync with the data. It's a good visual representation of the data. And in some cases, you'll see that this works even better when you're dealing with large amounts of data, although often charts are dealing with small amounts. So it's a great feature, relatively easy to use, and it's got tons of options. So anytime you want to display numerical information in a more graphical way, you'll be using the chart feature. Excel has many different chart types. You've heard of column charts, bar charts, line charts, and it's not always clear which chart type is going to work best for your data. But it's really easy to make a change. And so when you create a chart, and I'm about to do this with this data right here, I'll do it quickly with that shortcut, Alt F1. There's a chart. That's a clustered column chart, perhaps the most common chart type we see in Excel. But there are many others, and let's consider some options. When a chart is created, it's automatically selected. On the Design tab, Change Chart Type. There are some other kinds of column charts. Here's a stacked column chart. That's cleaner looking, you might say. By reading the height of it, we know the total. It's hard to read the individual colors, though, month to month. We got some other choices out here. Sometimes it's just the visuals. That might get your attention, but is it easy to read? Not quite so easy. But at least we've got some options. And maybe, rather than just looking at column charts, we start exploring some others. Now, we don't necessarily need to see all these. We know what we're trying to show here. Why not? Bar chart. There we go. That looks pretty good. It's the same idea. It's just rotated 90 degrees. And you might just have a personal favorite. Sometimes it's completely subjective. One thing I do recommend, though, when you create a chart is to use this button here called Switch Row Column. And the description doesn't quite give you any indication as to how it's really going to look. So click it anyway. Before you do it, though, notice each cluster here of bars is about a furniture item, and the colors differentiate the regions. Switch row column, and now the colors are about the furniture item, and the clusters are about the region. Go back and forth. Sometimes when you do this, you say, well, both of those are pretty attractive. Well, you could have them both on the screen if you want. And if you do want to do that, chart selected, you can duplicate it with Control D, D for duplicate, and change one of them. We got that. Different clustering. And that works with column charts and line charts as well. Now, if you are dealing with data that covers a time frame, like the data here, a line chart tends to work best. I'm going to create this time by going to the Insert tab in the ribbon, and I know I want a line chart, so I could go right here, Insert Line, there it is. The fourth option tends to work best if you want to get markers, and there it is. And this indicates a trend month by month. When you see a line chart, nearly always across the bottom you'll see some time frame. If you switch row column here, that's not so good at all. Usually with line charts there's a clear favorite as you look at these. Now, the examples we've seen so far have not been dealing with a lot of data, and that's often the case. But farther down on the same worksheet is about a 2.5-year list of sales here. Alt F1, column chart. That's not bad. We can make a case for that. But on the other hand, change chart type, make this be a line chart. I think this is going to look better. Do be alert to this idea, though. With line charts, if you make them wider and maybe not as tall, it tends to flatten out the data. And if you're trying to hide an increasing trend, well, that might be one way to do it. Now, without changing the source data whatsoever, I'm going to make this be a lot taller. And we get this effect. So be alert to that idea. You can change the meaning of a chart just by changing its size, particularly with a line chart. Also, when you're changing chart type and you do have time, and you've got different kinds of data at different times, consider what an area chart might look like. Not a good choice here. Some of these other choices, what's a tree map chart? Would that work here? Well, it might. You might explore that a little bit. Sunburst. So lots of different chart types. And the more you work with charts, the more you will change the chart type. There's so many different options, and some data just looks better with one kind of a chart versus another kind. It's a feature that you can easily manipulate and work with as you work with charts. Excel for Office 365 has a valuable new feature. It's an analytical tool, and it's called Ideas, a feature introduced in previous versions of Office 365 and originally called Insights. The feature was enhanced and renamed in late 2018 as Ideas, and it's located on the Home tab. Far right button. As we slide over the button, we see the description. It is a preview feature, meaning it will be upgraded at different times. Discover more about your data. Ideas looks for patterns in your data that it can use to create intelligent, personalized suggestions. For the most part, we're likely to see suggestions that are either charts or pivot charts. On this worksheet called Ideas in our Chapter 7 charting file, we've got data in columns A through G. This is transaction type data. It's about 900 rows. We can either highlight it all, but since it is surrounded by empty cells and worksheet boundaries, we can simply click within it. And then as we click the Ideas button, Excel will analyze all that contiguous data and give us some ideas. Get used to the idea that not all these are going to be perfect. In fact, the first one here doesn't look like it's going to be very useful at all. The next one certainly is, though. I know at a glance now, and I might not even necessarily want to pursue this any further, but I see clearly we've sold more televisions than clothes washers. If we want to keep this information more prominently, what do we see below? Insert. Now, often it will be a pivot chart, sometimes just a regular chart. Let's click this. We're about to see a new sheet. And there it is. And there's a pivot chart right there. You can move it around. Maybe you've never worked with them before, but here's a pivot chart. There's the summary data off to the left based on the information that we saw on the other sheet. It's a crowded screen for the moment. I'm going to close this dialog box here and then go back to the Ideas sheet because there's some other choices out there to the right too. Notice the scroll bar. We can scroll down. The next one, I'm not so sure that I'd be interested in that. It says items and amount appear highly correlated. Okay, well, that's good. But if I want this, I can insert the chart as well. This is not a pivot chart, and get some visual analysis of the data. Farther down, we're noticing something else, maybe a bit unusual and something maybe we just want to observe and move on. For the salesperson, Bill Babowski, and the customer, Electro City, that's a minimum number of items sold for whatever reason. But what do we see below this? Show all 35 results. Click it, and we see some more choices. And the scroll bar becomes active on the right side. We can start to scroll down, see some other choices. For the customer Electro City, amount has outliers, some unusually high or unusually low numbers. It picks up on those too. And we see some other analysis below that as well too. One of these salespersons here has sold more televisions than anything else, which may or may not be unusual. But we're getting, pardon the pun perhaps, ideas about how we might analyze the data. And lots of choices here. One of these persons here has noticeably higher amounts based on working with one customer or another. And we see some other choices as well too. Now, closing the dialog box, I'm going to click into this middle set of data here. This is about 700 rows of data, HR type data. Again, I'm not sure what I might get out of this, but let's click that Ideas button again. And off to the right, we begin to see some other choices. Years by building probably wouldn't be very interesting. That job rating, not so much either. On this one, I'm not seeing much so far with the first 4 choices, but let's show all 37 results and head down that path too, eventually, of looking at some of these others, seeing which of these are going to work with our data or make sense to us. And undoubtedly, you'll be getting some ideas here. Now, you probably would have known if you know the data well, but maybe you didn't. Full-time accounts for the majority of compensation. It's probably true in many organizations, but not necessarily all. So we begin to see lots of different opportunities here. Outliers again, notice here. And there's other data on this worksheet. I'll click back within the worksheet, scroll to the right. A smaller amount of data, let's just click in here. Click Ideas, the Ideas button on the Home tab, and we're about to see some more information out here. Insert chart, not a pivot chart. 2 examples here where we're seeing analysis of the data. So one by one, as you use this feature, I think you can begin to say it opens the door to some thoughts, some ideas about this information that I hadn't really thought about perhaps, or maybe it just gives me the ability to quickly create a chart based on some new analysis that I hadn't thought about. So an ideal feature here called Ideas is found on the Home tab, far right button on the ribbon, a valuable addition to the analytical capability of Excel. When you work with large lists, as you start to scroll down the list, now you might be using the scroll bar on the right-hand side, or maybe you're using the mouse wheel or trackpad. I'm using a mouse wheel here. What happens? Row 1 disappears. That's where the titles are. Now maybe I don't know this data too well. You could figure out what some of the titles would be, but why not keep that row in place all the time? By way of a feature called Freeze. Freeze panes, and it's found on the View tab in the ribbon. Freeze panes. Freeze a portion of the sheet to keep it visible while you scroll through the rest of the sheet. It's got 3 options. Many times we want to freeze the top row. Now when you apply this feature, just make sure it's visible. The active cell doesn't have to be there. Freeze top row. Subtle difference, separator between row 1 and 2 is a little darker, but as we start to, in my case, use the mouse wheel to scroll down, we see what's happening. It's there all the time. This has nothing to do with printing. You can leave it here all the time if you wish, or take it off anytime, reapply it. It has nothing to do with content. Let's say we remove it. Freeze panes, unfreeze panes. Now, what if we had many, many columns here? We move left and right. We're losing track of which person's data we're seeing here. We might want to see column A, the leftmost column. So, as long as it's visible, and the active cell could be anywhere, we could, instead of freezing the top row, go to Freeze Panes, freeze the first column. Scrolling left and right, I'll use the scroll bar in the lower right-hand corner. Scrolling to the right, we're always seeing column A. And you might be imagining, could we see both? Could we always see row 1 and see column A? Yes, we can. For the moment, we've got column A frozen. Let's go back to freeze panes and unfreeze them. Now, as we go back to the button before making a selection here, the first option, freeze panes, says keep rows and columns visible while the rest of the worksheet scrolls based on current selection. That doesn't quite tell you what to do, but here's how it works. If we apply that feature, in other words, if the active cell is here or there or wherever, Excel will freeze every row above the active cell and to the left of it. So if we need to see just column A and row 1, we click in cell B2. If we wanted to see both columns A and B and row 1, we'll click in cell C2. So the freeze will occur above and to the left of the active cell. We're at cell B2, freeze panes, freeze panes. can scroll up and down, we'll always see row 1, and we can scroll left and right, we'll always see column A. And once again, this has no impact on printing or anything else. It doesn't change any data whatsoever. All these commands too, by the way, fall into the category of commands that you cannot get to by way of the undo redo capability. And we don't really need that capability anyway. If we don't want the feature anymore, we'll simply unfreeze and at a later time apply it again. It's a relatively easy feature to use, and it gives us the ability to easily move up and down or move left-right within a worksheet and see those vital headings. Sometimes, particularly working with large lists, you might want to see information from different parts of this list, and they might be hundreds of rows apart. On this worksheet called Split Screen, in the workbook called 08 Worksheet Views, in this list, there's a training group. There are actually 2 or 3 different training groups. We might want to be viewing the people's names from one group as well as those in the other group. And maybe those others are found down in row 500. These are around row 95. So what can we do here? There's a feature called Split. And we can split the screen either horizontally, allowing us to scroll independently above or below that split line. Also, we can do it vertically. Let's first look at the horizontal version. This begins with this idea. We can be anywhere on the screen, but let's click over in column A, roughly halfway down. Then, on the View tab, choose Split. Notice how it introduces a vertical line. And off to the right, we've got 2 scroll bars. So, in the top scroll bar, I'm going to click the drop arrow over there, or drag the box, and I'm scrolling through the list. Keep clicking that arrow over there. And I forget where the data is, so I'm looking for it. There it is. I want some of those admin training names to appear there. And meanwhile, I've got another list, I think it's around row 500. So in the lower portion of the screen, I've got that other scroll bar over there. I'm going to drag that down into row 500 or thereabouts. And somewhere in there, so I'm scrolling now with the mouse to find those records. There we are. I want to see these together. I could zoom back now if I wanted to also. But we're looking at a completely different part of the same worksheet at the same time. It's going to be really handy at times. So after reviewing the data or using it for presentation purposes, we can get rid of the split. We can either double click the line if we wish, or simply go back to the split command and the feature's gone. Now, at other times, you might want to split the screen left-right. Probably not as commonly used, but maybe you've got some data with lots of columns and you're making a presentation. You want to pull data together from different portions without necessarily hiding columns, something like that. Here too, we sort of arbitrarily click, this time in the top row, about halfway over or so. Split, that introduces a vertical split. And now I've got 2 scroll bars at the bottom for either side. On the left side, we can scroll left and right without disturbing what's happening on the right side. On the right side, we can do the same kind of thing. So we're seeing columns A and J close to one another here, but they're actually different portions of the screen. And this is a little bit odd because we've got them, in the wrong order, so to speak. That's viable, and you can work with it. We can move this line back and forth when necessary if we want to do that. Sometimes that makes sense, sometimes not. Here too, if we no longer want to use the feature, we'll double click the line or go back to the split command. Now, some people discover this feature in a way, and I remember doing it myself once. I had the active cell somewhere in the middle of the screen, and I click split. I'm trying to remember whether I did it on purpose or not, but if you do click split and you're not on the edge of the data, either top or left, we see a 4-way split. And that means 2 scroll bars on the right side and 2 on the bottom. And this is almost a recipe for chaos. I'm going to scroll in the upper portion right now, and then down the lower portion, just like we saw earlier, and then scroll independently on the right side or the left side. And it's kind of confusing, I think. To prove a point, I'm not sure how major this point is likely to be, but in the upper left corner here, I've got cell A1. In the lower right quadrant, I'm going to click one of these cells, double click the bottom edge, come to the bottom, control down arrow. That's the very last row in any Excel worksheet. Control right arrow. There we are in the extreme lower right-hand corner. If you can see that cell and cell A1 at the same time, what does that say? We can see any 2 cells in the worksheet at the same time by way of this feature. But how often are you going to need that? Probably not very often. We can get rid of the 4-way split by double-clicking the intersection, or simply, as we've been doing, go back to the split command. So click, click, gone. Sometimes it doesn't work so smoothly. Double click. You got to be careful not to move the mouse as you do it. Double click. There we go. So it's a feature you're more likely to use to split the screen horizontally. That was the first example we saw. Maybe not quite as often to split it vertically, but the split four-way, not so often. But it's a feature that does give you that capability of seeing data in different parts of the worksheet at the same time. There are a number of reasons at different times for renaming a worksheet, for inserting a new worksheet, deleting a worksheet, and occasionally even hiding a worksheet, and of course later unhiding it. We're looking at a workbook called 09 Regional Sales, and the current sheet is the East sheet. I'd like to rename that Midwest sheet. I can right-click that sheet, it's called Midwest right now, right-click that sheet and rename, and I can certainly start typing, do that right now. Slightly faster, I'll double-click that Sheet tab, that activates it, and I'll just type Central. Sheet names can have up to 31 characters. Do not begin a sheet name with a number. It can contain spaces and underscores, and when we're finished, just press Enter. We can easily insert a new sheet. We're about to create a mountain region here. I want a new sheet to the left of the West sheet. A few different ways to do this. As you might guess, we can then choose Worksheet, which is the automatic selection. Click OK. We'll have a new sheet to the left of that sheet. We can also do this when the West is selected. I'll simply press Shift F11. That also inserts a new sheet. And there's a third way. This will put a new sheet to the right of the current one. There's a plus. Typically, we see it off to the right of the last Sheet tab. Keep your eye on that West sheet. We're about to see a new sheet to the right of that. There we are. Now, as it turns out, I don't need this sheet. This sheet 5, I'm going to right-click and delete. There's no data in it, so there's no warning or any second thoughts about that. But what if I decide to delete sheet 4 and I mistakenly right-click on the West sheet? Now, this is highly unlikely, but occasionally, these things happen. I'm on the path to deleting the West sheet. Now, it does have data in it, and I get this warning. Microsoft Excel will permanently delete this sheet. Now, what this really means is we cannot undo this action. In fact, most actions related to sheet tabs we can't undo. If I click delete here, the West sheet is gone, and my only recourse to get that back would be to close the file without saving it. So I'll simply cancel here. So we want to be particularly sensitive. This sheet here I don't need, right-click delete. Again, there will be no warning. That's an empty sheet, has no data. And same thing with sheet 1. As it turns out, maybe I don't need that. But maybe I'll come back later and rename it Mountain. From time to time, you might need to hide a sheet. Now, possibly others use this workbook, or maybe I use it for demo purposes. I don't need this to be showing here. So we can right-click a Sheet tab and hide a sheet. At a later time, if we need to get that back, we don't have to be near where that sheet was hidden, but we could go to another Sheet tab, any Sheet tab, right-click. If unhide is selectable, it means there's at least one hidden sheet. We'll click unhide. If you've got multiple hidden sheets, you can only unhide one at a time. So at some point, maybe I want to unhide this, click OK, and there it is back again in its previous location. So as we've seen, it's easy to rename a sheet, typically by double-clicking. We can insert a sheet in a variety of different ways. From time to time, we will delete a sheet, being very careful about not being able to undo, and occasionally hide and unhide worksheets. You can move a worksheet left or right just by dragging it. We're in this workbook 09 Regional Sales. I want the South sheet to be to the left of Midwest. I'll simply click and drag the South sheet, put it to the left of Midwest. At other times, you might want to make a copy of a sheet. I want to take the data in the West sheet, make a copy of it. Maybe I want to experiment with a variation on these numbers. I've got the Control key held down now. I'll drag this right or left, let go of the mouse first, and we made a copy of a sheet. You can do that easily. If I were to right-click on the West sheet, choose Move or Copy, this might take a little longer if I do what I just did here, but I might want to create a copy of that sheet and put it in a new workbook. I choose New Workbook, click OK, we have a new workbook. I'm not going to go there right now, but that's easily done. There might be other workbooks open too. I could copy it into those as well too. Now, I've got 4 sheets here, East, South, Midwest, West. They've got identical layouts. In other words, their headings in row 2 and column A are all the same. I might want to make a change to all of them. I might want to change the zoom factor on all of them too. Whenever you want to make changes to multiple sheets, you can group them. Now, if they're consecutive, as they are here, we can click on the East or West sheet, makes no difference. In other words, the one at either end. I just click the East sheet. Now I've got the Shift key held down, and I'll click on that West sheet tab. Those sheets are grouped, certainly has a different appearance. And at the top of your screen, following the file name, you see the word Group. When these are grouped, a change we make here, even though we're only viewing one of the sheets, is going to be happening on all 4 of these sheets. I want a new row between rows 6 and 7. I right-click row 7 and insert. We've got a new row. And if I look at the Midwest sheet, West sheet, South sheet, that's happened on all of them. I'm going to click on cell A1. That's happening on all of them. And in the lower right-hand corner, there's that zoom slider bar. I'm going to slide that back and forth a little bit. I'm changing the zoom factor on all these sheets at the same time. And it's up to you to remember that they are grouped. Not that long ago, I remember changing a cell in a situation like this, and I realized only later that I had made that change on multiple sheets because they were still grouped. So you'll learn to keep an eye on the word group up in the title bar, and of course the display does look different. So on these different sheets here, notice how that sometimes we still want to do scrolling, and I did click on that cell and it happened on all of them. Nothing truly wrong with that. At some point we want to ungroup. So if I right-click, ungroup, that's certainly one way, or I could have grouped on one of the sheets that's not part of the group, for example, sheet 2, ungroup. It's unlikely that in this particular layout of worksheets that I would want to make a change to 2 sheets that are not adjacent, but if I wanted to make a change to the Midwest sheet and the East sheet, but not the other 2, Midwest is selected, I'll hold down the Control key and click East. Once again, the word group appears in the title bar at the top. If I make a change now, and I'll just do a simple one here, I'll click here and make this italic. That happened on the East sheet, happened on the Midwest sheet, and as I click South, it will ungroup. It didn't happen on the South sheet, didn't happen on the West sheet. So we've seen the technique for grouping sheets. Usually it's consecutive. Click, shift-click at either end of a list of sheets. We saw earlier how to move a sheet and copy a sheet. Different techniques you'll use as you work with multi-sheet workbooks. As you work with lists in Excel, it's not uncommon to want to rearrange the order of rows within a list. We call that sorting. And although there is a way to sort by columns, moving columns left and right, nearly always sort means let's rearrange the order of the rows based on what we see in one or more columns. As we look at this worksheet here, it's called sorting. It's in the workbook 10, Data Management Features. It appears to be sorted by either column H or J, descending order. We might want to rearrange it by department. Anytime you're about to sort a list, if there's other data on the same worksheet, and I do have data off to the right, I need it there. Perhaps I've got more way off to the right too. I need that there, but I certainly don't want to sort it along with the other rows. So before sorting a list, always make sure that your list is delineated by at least an empty column on the right. And if there happens to be data below it, make sure you've got a few empty rows separating that data as well. When we're ready to sort, we can highlight the data. Or if we know that we have no empty rows or columns within it, we can just click within the data and start using the sort commands. It's not a bad idea, particularly if you haven't seen the data in a while or someone else sent it to you. Click within the data, press Control A, think of A for all, then press Control period a few times. This will simply move the active cell around the corners of the range. What you don't want to have happen is to end up sorting and then realize that only some of your data got sorted. We go down to the bottom here, keep pressing Control period. And again, you don't have to do that very often, just a quick reminder. Okay, we're ready to sort. We can keep the data highlighted or click within it. On the Home tab, you will see Sort and Filter. You can click there and then go into Custom Sort, or you can go to the Data tab and use the larger of the sort buttons right here. Sort, this doesn't say Custom Sort, but it means the same thing. 2 small buttons here we'll get to in a minute. Sort, Excel highlights the data, and if there's a header row, Excel nearly always figures it out. If that's the case, you want to make sure this box is checked. We don't want row 1 treated like all the others. Rare times would you not have a header, and of course this should be unchecked. We can sort on the basis of what's in 1 column, 2 columns, 3 columns. Older versions of sort only let us work on the basis of 3. We can now go as high as 64. We want our major grouping here, let's say by department. So sort by Click the drop arrow, it shows our field names, department. Now in some departments, there are going to be a lot of people there. So as we're looking at that department, we might want to add level. Let's sort by status. And we might even, in some departments, have a lot of people with the same status and same department, so we could add another level, maybe even another level. If it's a text field, you probably want these to be in alphabetical order. If it's a numeric field, say that third level in, we might want this to be by years. Consider whether you want it to be smallest to largest or largest to smallest. Then we'll have a fourth level here by employee name. Sorting is very fast. Click OK. Sometimes it seems practically instantaneous. We're about to see a new list, sorted by department, within each department, in order by status, within that by years, within that by employee name. And there it is. Here are a bunch of contract people, account management. Here are the full-time people. Quite a few of them here. Full-time people, account management. Notice that in column F, although we're not seeing the heading, that's years of service. So they're in order by years of service. And in this group right here, they have the same status, years of service, department. They're in order alphabetical. You quickly get the feel of what sorting does for you. It simply moves rows up and down nearly all the time. At a later time, if you simply wanted to resort this list by employee name, you could click somewhere in column A, click the simple AZ button right here. Going to rearrange the entire list by employee name. Now, if the next sort you do, either immediately or a few hours or days later, if we click in column C and then choose AZ, we're now rearranging the data based on what's in column C. But Excel does remember that right now it's in order by employee name. So now within each department, it's in order by employee name. And if at a later time I come back and click in column D, I'm going to sort by status, Excel remembers the previous orders. So sometimes when you're sorting on multiple levels, if you remember that the last sort always overrides but remembers the previous order, you can even use these buttons in succession as you get more comfortable with sorting. Also, from time to time, there are special options in here. You can sort on cell color. We don't have any on the screen here, or by font color. Or if you're familiar with conditional formatting icons, you can sort on that basis as well too. If there is that occasional but rare need to sort by moving columns left and right, you'll jump into options and you'll see that choice, sort left to right. So sorting is generally foolproof, fast, relatively easy, and it's absolutely indispensable as you work with large lists of data. Anytime you'd like to hide rows within a list and focus on just the rows of most importance for the moment, you can use a feature called filter. It's widely used and generally pretty straightforward and easy. So we've got a list here on the worksheet called filter. It's got about 700 rows or so in the workbook 10 data management features. The filter option is found on the right side of the home tab under sort filter. You could start there. There it is, filter. Or on the data tab. Now before doing this, you want to make sure that the list you're working with has no empty rows or columns within it. Click anywhere within the list, activate filter. We see filter arrows at the top of each column. I'm only interested in seeing the full-time people here. I'll click the arrow for status. This is a text field. Notice that as we slide down, we see the term text filters, and you possibly could imagine using some of these at different times. In the example here, all we want to do is make sure that only full-time has a check on it. How about unselecting all, click full-time, click OK. Lower left corner tells us 393 of 741 records found. Now sometimes you'll do filtering on multiple columns. Of all these full-time people here, let's say we only want to focus on those who have a job rating of 5. Column I, now that's a number filter. At different times we could consider using some of these, but let's say in this case all we care about, unselect all, 5. Okay, there we are. Only 92 records. And not that we have to narrow it further, but along with this, we could say, let's see, out of all these people here, how many of our full-time people with a job rating of 5 have been here over 10 years? Number filters, greater than or equal to, and of course there's a difference. How about 10 or more? If we say greater than or equal to, it's going to be 10 or more. There we are. And that list is down to 39. At any given time, when you see a list like this, if you were to copy and paste this, Excel would only pick up the visible data. So right now, if I were to copy, go to a different worksheet and paste, this is the only data we would see. At different times, you no longer want the list to be filtered, but yet you want to keep the filter arrows. The button just to the right is clear. If we're working across a date field like column E, here as we click the drop arrow, we see the term date filters. Imagine if this were historical data of a transaction type nature, we might want to view yesterday's data, last week's data, last month, last quarter, last year. If it's predictive data, we can go in the opposite direction. And all the way down at the bottom, all the dates in the period. So if we want to make a little list here of all the people having an anniversary month in October, we'd choose October, and here are all the people hired in October. I think you can imagine using a field like this too in other kinds of scenarios with other kinds of data. So all of our October data is visible, 58 out of 741 records. So it's a relatively easy feature to use. If we no longer want filtering at all for the moment, we'll simply click filter, and any filtering that's in place immediately disappears, as does those filter arrows at the top of each column. So at different times we want to hide the rows we don't want to see. The filter feature gets us there quickly. One of Excel's most powerful analytical tools is what we call a pivot table. It's a great tool for creating quick summary totals based on a list of data. And on this worksheet here called Pivot Table Data, in the workbook 10 Data Management Features, we've got a list of about 900 rows. It's not sorted, as it often might be. It doesn't need to be to create a pivot table. A list like this should have no empty rows or columns within it. What we'd like to be able to do is to come up with some good quick summary information here. So, off to the right, I've done this manually ahead of time with the kind of list you can imagine wanting to get. It's a list of all the salespersons here. They can sell products to any region, so we see how that's broken out by region. And how do we get to something like this? Here's a formula here in cell J4. I'll double click it. Not the most difficult of formulas, but on the other hand, it's going to take you some time to come up with answers like this and verify them. And we wouldn't have a lot of flexibility here if we had to quickly turn this around and put in another field up here, for example, product or customer instead of this. We can create a list like this with a pivot table in about 5 or 10 seconds without formulas. And that's what we're going to do. Check out the list ahead of time, make sure there are no empty rows or columns. You need only click within the list. And although it is a data management-like tool in one respect, it's not found on the Data tab. It's on the Insert tab. Let's click Pivot Table. Excel nearly always gets it right. It figures out the extent of the data. We could put this on the same worksheet, but more likely, let's go with the default setting here, New Worksheet. Many times you'll just glance, click OK. We're on a new sheet. Off to the right is the all-important Pivot Table Fields list. It shows those same column headings as we saw before. We can make this wider and narrower. A couple of clicks and a drag, and we will have a pivot table. I'm going to click the box for salesperson at the left-hand side of the screen. That's a unique and alphabetized list of our salespersons. I'll zoom in a bit using the slider bar, bottom right of our screen. I'm going to click the box for items. Watch those numbers over there. And I'll drag the word region into the columns area. That's it. Now, you might have noticed before, and I'll point out our best salesperson, Willie Loman, right there. Grand total, 8111. Not a formula in sight. Let's jump back to the source data. One sheet to the right. There are those same numbers out there. There's Willie Loman, 1073, grand total, 8111. We got here pretty fast. Not quite right, maybe with these. Nothing wrong with those, but notice something else. When the active cell is within the pivot table, we've got a new ribbon, Pivot Table Tools, with a contextual Analyze tab and a Design tab. Now you wouldn't know instinctively what to do here, but on the Design tab, Report Layout, Compact is the default. If we choose Outline or Tabular, we'll see the actual field names there. I think most people would probably want that, so salesperson, region, looking good. And if we were making a presentation, you could imagine somebody in the audience might say something like, okay, we see the breakout by region, how about by product? And what do? In the pivot table field list to the right, we'll uncheck the box for region and drag the word product into this area called columns. Now you quickly start beginning to see how the lower portion of this pivot table fields list is like a mapping of the pivot table. We've got products here across these column headings. Salespersons are in rows, so we see the term rows, columns out here. In no time are we seeing any formulas. And not only can our comparison be just between two fields here, product and salesperson, we could bring region back here. I'll put it in the rows area. Watch the screen down the left-hand side. And I'll zoom back again with that slider bar a bit. You see what's happening. Now that's maybe contrary to what a lot of people envision as a pivot table. Usually it's compact, give me the big picture sort of thing, but in some cases this would be appropriate. We can make some other changes. Here's a design tab. Off to the left are subtotals. We might not want to show those. Or maybe we'll just move these fields around in different ways, making all kinds of different comparisons. Maybe if we compare or change the order of this, drag salesperson below region, we see a different layout that way. So there are just so many different ways to view the data. We never worry as we do this too about disrupting or threatening our source data. And one little oddity that you get used to, at least initially, is this idea. If we do make changes to the source data, the pivot table does not adjust automatically. You go to the Analyze tab and refresh the data, or use that keystroke shortcut, Alt F5. So that's something to keep an eye on. But it's an amazingly powerful tool. It gets us here quickly. We create these summary lists. We manipulate the data in a variety of ways. It's just indispensable. In Excel, the term data type might refer to the idea that a cell or group of cells contain text or they contain numbers. But in 2019, Excel introduced a new feature called a data type. And at that time, there were only two data types, stocks and geography. But a new concept was introduced along with those data types, the idea of pulling in information from the internet, real-time data that could be refreshed. Stocks and geography has been expanded, and there are now preview data types available. We see them in the green panel here, and if you're an Office Insider, you can go to the Data tab and see these options available here. Now, a couple of examples will give us some insight into how this feature works. I've got data in column A. I want to pull in some nutritional information. So one approach certainly is to jump out to the internet, copy some data, say out of Wikipedia, come back here, paste it. But you know how cumbersome that can be? And is it up to date? That's another concern. And did I find all the information I wanted? Let's do this a little bit differently by first taking this data here and converting it into what's called a table. Not everybody works with this feature, but anytime you are working with lists, I think it's advantageous to convert the list into a table to get not only additional formatting capabilities, but also data handling efficiencies. So selecting this data over in column A, I'm envisioning a list here that's going to grow. I want to pull in some nutritional information. So after selecting the data, I'll press Control T, click OK. The data is now a table. This is not a prerequisite for using the new feature, but I do recommend it. Now, going to the Data tab in the ribbon, off to the right in the category called Data Types, we've got a drop arrow here. And in this case, the category is Food. Click it. And what are we doing? We're pulling in information from the internet. I can click on this cell for Apple right here, and clicking the actual icon, there is some information about an apple. And I can expand that greatly category by category. But what I really want to do here is to pull in some information, let's say, about calories. Here's a button. It's the Quick Analysis button. I'll click it. Here's lots of information. I'm interested in total calories. Click it. There it is. I'll do this again. And for the next column, I want carbohydrates. That's pulled in. At a later time, I might want to add another fruit, so I'll put in pear. As I press enter, the same sort of thing is going to happen here. Slight pause while Excel pulls in the data. Now, the information that we saw that was available out there is actually being stored in each of these cells in column A. And it can be refreshed. We can right click and there's data type. We can refresh it. We could convert it back to text if we wanted to. But in some cases, in some categories here, we can even pull in pictures and maps. I've got some data in column E, same general idea here too. I'll click within the data, convert it to a table, Control T, OK. Excel picks up all the contiguous data. I'll change the color for readability purposes up there. And once again, going to the Data tab, this time clicking the drop arrow, I'll choose Location. convert to a location. This will take a bit longer. We will see a particular icon associated with each city, and again, the ability to pull in information. And there it is. I'm clicking the quick analysis button again. I want to get city population. There it is. I'm also interested in additional features. Another way to use this is by way of a formula. So I can type equal. I'll click over on New York City here, and we see the information listed this way. How about median household income? Double click, enter. And because it's a table, the data is pulled in more efficiently. And off to the right, we see other categories as well. Universities, mountains, movies, you can imagine others. And on a different worksheet here called Future Data Types, here are some of the additional data types that we will be seeing soon. If you are interested in the ability to get to these features, going back to that first worksheet here, go to insider.office.com. Now, there's another capability here that's pretty incredible, and that's the ability to set up data types using our own data. So in a different worksheet here called Employees List, here's a list that I need frequently. It's got many, many columns, nearly 750 rows. And I often need this data, but many times I don't need all of it. So what I've done ahead of time, and I'll give you just a brief overview, I've used a feature called Power Query. That's well beyond the scope of this course. I could have also used a feature called Power BI. That's a business analytics service from Microsoft. So selecting this data, earlier I went to Get and Transform on the Data tab and used the option called From Table Range. And this took me into the Power Query Editor, and there's an option there called Create Data Type. I did that ahead of time, and it was rather straightforward. So it's available, and here on the next worksheet is an example of having pulled in that data. I used an option here called Queries and Connections. I simply pulled in the column entry here. And here's an option by way of that quick analysis button, the same kind of information that we saw earlier. I simply want to show the compensation here and the status for the moment. That's all I need for now. At a later time, I might want to use this on a different worksheet or expand it in different ways by adding additional columns. If you are interested in how Power Query works or Power BI, which is even more powerful, I recommend these courses available in the LinkedIn library, Excel Power Query, and Power BI Essential Training. And as we've seen, the data types not only available with our own data, shown here, but those earlier examples with Fruit and City, you can imagine how the way we talk about data types is quite different now. And even though I didn't show you an example of map and pictures, those too can be data type elements pulled into the information. If I lost internet access right now, I still have all this data available, and I can add additional columns. So this is a new way of working with data, and I think you can see that for many users who work with lists of data, this is a powerful addition. It will change the way you work with Excel. If you want to provide better security for your data, and possibly if you've got multiple users using the same workbook, you want to be aware of two commands. One for protecting the workbook, one for protecting the worksheet. We're looking at the file 11 protection, and the very first sheet is called worksheet protection. Let's first talk about protecting a workbook. Both of the commands that I mentioned are on the Review tab in the ribbon. Protect workbook. And this is primarily about the structure of a workbook, moving, deleting, and adding sheets. If we protect a workbook, you cannot insert a new sheet, move a sheet, delete a sheet, and as we'll see in a moment, practically all commands available as we right-click a tab are going to be inhibited. Protect workbook. Need to provide a password. I know it. I might tell certain others, not others. And if I save the workbook, it stays in this state. Right now, I'm about to right-click on the current sheet tab. Notice how many of the commands are grayed out. Can't use them. And even if I were curious and thought, I wonder if there's a hidden sheet, I don't even know that necessarily because I can't get to those commands. So while it's in this state, can't do this. If I click Protect Workbook right now, well, if I don't know the password, I can't change that status. but of course I do right now. At some point, I will unprotect the workbook. Now, protecting the worksheet probably is the command that you're more likely to want to use. It gives us control in a lot of different ways. And it might begin with something that doesn't seem related at first. If you right-click any cell in Excel and go to Format Cells, if you go to the Protection tab, and by the way, it's not always selected, but we see here the cell is locked. Locking cells has no effect until you protect the worksheet. So probably all the cells in this worksheet, as in most worksheets, it's locked. I'm going to begin by saying the following. Let's unlock everything, because let's say we've got a situation where we want others to be able to make some editing changes to clean up this file, but we want to be careful about not letting them make changes in certain areas. So let's begin by clicking the upper left corner. That selects the entire worksheet. Let's right-click, Format Cells, go to Protection, Unlock. Sometimes, by the way, you'll see that this box is checked or blank as it is now. Sometimes it'll be black, meaning some are locked, some are not. We want to make sure that's empty looking right now. We have unlocked all cells. Now we're going to lock some, meaning we don't want any changes in the following columns. Column E has formulas. You don't need to know the details right now, but it's based on data in column D. We're going to be locking column E, and now I'm holding down the control key. We're also going to be locking column G. We don't want anybody typing any salary changes there. And let's say column H is maybe even more sensitive. We don't want that visible. So we've got these two columns selected. Right-click, Format Cells. Let's lock these. But for column H, I'm just going to right-click on column H alone and hide it. Now, if we turn on protection, then the idea of a cell being locked or unlocked has some real meaning. Those locked cells we cannot change. All right, we're ready to try the feature, Protect Sheet. And look what else pops up. A whole series of potential questions and answers about do we want to allow inserting and deleting of rows? Well, we would think that out a little bit and perhaps experiment a little bit. At a minimum, if we want other users to be able to make some changes in the appropriate locations, you must allow Select Unlock Cells to be selected. Let's provide a password. Click OK, provide the password again, click OK. It's now in this state. And by the way, a visual giveaway, if you happen to be on the Home tab, or if you jumped over there, most of these formatting features are grayed out. So imagine this little scenario. The other user is here. This cell needs to be changed to 2004. This is years of service. You can imagine somebody saying, well, if this is 2004, I'll just make this be a 14. Oops, can't do that. We can't type there. That cell is locked. But we can change this to be 2004. Enter. This is my friend, Jim. I think Jim deserves 60,000. Well, I start to type. We can't type there. And I'm wondering what's in that hidden column. I drag across here. There's a hidden column H out there. Right-click. Let's unhide it. Well, we can't unhide it. So you've seen various ways to protect the data here. When this is back in my hands, or if that other curious user says, well, I wonder if I could unprotect this somehow. Back to review, unprotect the sheet. Well, of course, you got to know the password. And I do. And now it's back in its so-called normal state. So I've seen different reasons for wanting to protect a worksheet, and prior to that, to protect an entire workbook. Both valuable tools when you're concerned about the security of your data. If you want to allow multiple users to access the same workbook, you'll need to know how to activate sharing, and ultimately the ability to track changes by each user. And when we say open at the same time, we're also opening the door to the idea that people could be making changes to the same cells in approximately the same time frame. The feature called sharing in prior versions of Excel used to be found on the Review tab. And when you go to the Review tab in the ribbon, you don't see sharing, but you might see here, grayed out, Unshare Workbook. So how do we share a workbook? We need to add an icon to the Quick Access toolbar. On the right side of the Quick Access toolbar, and most people do keep this above the ribbon, there's a drop arrow. Slide down to More Commands. In this dialog box, choose commands from either commands not in the ribbon or all commands. Slide down into the letter S, and you'll see an option. Share Workbook. It's a legacy feature. We add it to the Quick Access toolbar. As we click OK, we'll see it at the top of the screen. Share Workbook so that others can work in it at the same time, and workbooks containing tables cannot be shared. Let's click this button. Use the old shared workbook features. Now there is a new feature that is available if you're using Excel for Office 365. learn more about co-authoring. I'll just click this, and you might want to explore this on your own. A different way of collaboration, which ultimately might have some different features implemented than what we're about to see. It's called co-authoring. I'll close that dialog box for now. We're going to be using the old shared workbook feature. I have this open right now at the time of this recording. It's August 6th. On the Advanced tab, we make some choices. Ultimately, we are setting this up so that we can track changes, not only by ourselves, but by others as well. Keep changes. We probably want to experiment with the time frame here. We don't have to keep the history. Update changes every few minutes or when the file is saved. Make some choices there. And some of these features will pan out as we work with the tracking feature in the next movie. Let's click OK. This action will now save the workbook. Do you want to continue? I'm going to click OK. Now, the name of this workbook, as we opened it, was called 11 Workbook Before Sharing. There's only one worksheet on it. We're looking at it. As I click OK, watch the top of the screen, we now see Workbook Before Sharing, but now it is shared. And by the way, a little side note on here. Even though this says shared, this could be a file that only you use. So why would you share it? You share it if you want to keep track of changes. So although it sounds somewhat contradictory and somewhat strange, sometimes you'll set up a file for sharing simply to be able later to track your own changes and nobody else's, because nobody else is using it. So it's a feature that sets the stage for the tracking capability, which you'll see in the next movie. After you've set up a workbook to be shared, you can keep track of all the changes made by various users of that workbook. The workbook we're looking at right now has an unusual name, 11-Workbook After Sharing Setup, meaning this workbook has already had sharing set up. It's got one worksheet in called Vendor Sales. Now, what we'd like to be able to do is track changes. That's one of the reasons that we set up sharing. Multiple users will be using this. We want to track what changes are being made to it. Now, in prior versions of Excel, you would have seen on the Review tab a Track Changes feature, but it's not here anymore. You might have seen in the previous movie how we resurrected a feature out of the past. We do this by going to the Quick Access Toolbar, rightmost button, Customize Quick Access Toolbar. Go down to More Commands, and in this dialog box, choose commands from Commands Not in the Ribbon or All Commands. Slide down into the letter T, and we will see Track Changes. It's a legacy feature, just the way Share Workbook is. You might have seen that in the prior movie. Click OK. There we are. Let's click this button for Track Changes. Highlight Changes. Now, this might strike you as a little bit strange. If you did not share a workbook, by choosing to track changes, you automatically will share your workbook. Nevertheless, this is a shared workbook. We're going to be tracking changes. And so at different times, you will think out about how often you want to do this. Since I last saved all, this sort of thing, I'll just leave it at all. If you got multiple users, you could track this down by name. I could check everybody else. Eventually, you'll see a list of other names in here if you allow this to be shared by others. You could narrow down where you want to observe the changes, maybe just in certain columns or in certain sheets, that sort of thing. I'm going to leave the Who box unchecked. Just keep this at all. Highlight changes on the screen. Eventually, we might even want to list these on a new sheet. Let's click OK. This action will now save the workbook. Do you want to continue? Okay, let's do. Okay. I'm going to make a change. For example, in cell D7, this purple should have been blue. I'll just double click in here and change that to blue. And as I press enter, it looks a little different now. Click away from it a bit. Slide over this a bit later. I'm making this change on August 8th of 2018. You see the change and the description of what I changed it from and to. It's going to be handy. Second of the 15s over here has to be changed to a 20. And I'll tab over, make another change. These four entries here should all be Wyoming. Got them all highlighted. I'll type WY. And then because there's multiple cells, I'll press Control Enter instead of Enter. So I've got some changes there. Imagine we made a few more, and so on. If we go back to the Track Changes button, Highlight Changes, we could list the changes on a new sheet. But as we click OK, we might be reminded only changes which have been saved can be listed on the history sheet. Okay, let's save this workbook. There's the Save button, Quick Access Toolbar, or Control S. Now let's come back here, highlight these changes. List changes on a new sheet. Click OK. And there we are, a list of all the changes. By the way, you can track changes if you are the only user. You might have a workbook and you simply want to set up track changes so that you know what you've been doing. Maybe others aren't involved at all. But in a real life situation, there probably would be. And so what you also should do is sit down with your co-workers, maybe start off with only 2 or 3 people, set up a test file, kick these ideas back and forth a little bit, change some cells, look back and forth, see what's happening. And there's some other features that we don't have time to get into in detail, but do note, as we go back to track changes, we could accept or reject changes as well. And we can look at all of them by everyone. As we click OK here, we'll have a list, and one by one, we could either accept this one or accept all of them, reject them, and go through the entire list of changes. So I think you see the potential value of this. And so, as we can see, this ability to track changes made to a workbook by multiple users, even if it's only you, gives you that all-important paper trail that we so often need when we work with files in Excel.